Hello, everybody. You are listening to Through Time and Clades. My name is Albert.
And I'm Joan.
All right, and today is a very special episode because this is our 1 year anniversary special. Whoa! uh,
Yeah,
we've been
it's
doing this for just about a year. Yeah.
yeah, like almost down to the day. I,
Hmm.
I mean, we planned this out like perfectly, I think. Because oh man, 1 year. It's like, where does the time even go? It seems like it was only yesterday that we had just finished Dino Nerds for Black Lives.
Yeah, that's right.
That was like kind of like our reunion of Incidents and Reflections,
Yes.
which was a university radio show that I had helped out with back when I was in college. Um,
Hmm.
and we were both undergrads. I think we were both undergrads at
Yeah,
the
we
time.
were. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were like, well, we still got it. We still kind of have like our vibe going, and our interest in this is still as strong as ever. And we were like, what if we just try to kind of did something like that again? And sure enough, we spent a long time planning on it and asking for input from our friends. And the next thing you know, here we are 1 year later.
Wow. Yeah. So yeah, quite a milestone for our show, and we are very excited to be here. So today we have a number of things planned. Well, we're gonna take a bit of a self-indulgent look back and see what we've actually done with the show over this past year, briefly, and then as we offered, we will be answering mainly the questions you sent in. So yeah, we have some good ones. So thanks everybody who sent in questions. Yeah, we will get to them during this episode. And then finally, we want to talk a little bit about what we're gonna do next with the show, because yeah, we've gotten a lot of things done. A lot of our plans have been fulfilled. So what's next? We'll get into that.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that for sure.
All right. Do we want to go ahead and jump to the next slide?
Yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty. So, yeah, this is just briefly covering what we've managed to do over the past year with this show. The first video we uploaded was on August 23rd of 2020. So, yeah, almost exactly to the day of when we're recording this, and also when we'll eventually upload this episode. Um, so, yeah, the timing worked out pretty well there. Um, and we managed to complete both of the series of essentially lectures that we set out to do. So Joan finished 13 episodes of Humanity, a Prologue as planned, and I finished 15 episodes of Dinosaurs, the second chapter, as I planned. So those are our respective series on human origins and on the evolution of modern birds, respectively. So yeah, I think in some ways those are probably our biggest achievements with this show, because yeah, we really did kind of plan this show around trying to complete those series, and trying to bring all this information to all of you viewers in a way that we thought would be at least somewhat interesting, and we pretty much managed to do it. And furthermore, Joan has also managed to do an updates episode, kind of supplementing the information already provided in the main part of her series, since a lot of new studies have come out regarding the field of paleoanthropology as the series was progressing.
That was I mean, like these lecture series were really labors of love from the both of us. Because if you couldn't tell, I'm quite interested in paleoanthropology, and Albert is quite interested in dinosaur paleontology
Mhm,
and
mhm.
the evolution of birds. So it seemed almost fitting that for these lecture series we picked the topics we cared about the most, and
Right.
we were able to kind of put our heart into it. And even though like we had already had experience learning about these topics, and our interests had been for many years now on like keeping up with like the news about these subjects. I mean, these were really learning experiences as well.
Mhm, mhm.
Because I mean, at least in my case, with Humanity: A Prologue, I learned quite a bit about how prevalent like discourse is in the paleoanthropological community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, now, I mean, I had known about this sort of stuff, from reading it in popular literature. Of course, there's a wonderful book, Bones of Contention,
Yeah.
that goes through some of the history of this from like the earliest days. Famous paleoanthropologists butting heads about the interpretations of certain fossils. Um, but like to kind of see some of that in person as I was doing this series was also very interesting because I follow a number of paleoanthropologists on Twitter, and with every big paper that comes out, there's like multiple threads and comments and discussions by these same researchers, in response to the paper, whether they're for it or against it, or what problems there might be, or
Right.
what this might reveal about previous research. And sometimes it can get very heated.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to like the story of humans, like the stakes are a little bit high, depending on what studies you're looking at.
Yeah.
Um, because I mean, ultimately, like people today try to learn and answer the big questions of humanity by looking at the past and seeing, what evidence is there for how people behaved or how the world was organized, or how we survived in different environments, things like that, how we treated each other. And so, like, in doing this series, like, that became a major goal for me
Mm.
to just try to dip my toes in the water around these questions, and just kind of see like what do we know, what don't we know, and what are we trying to find out.
Yeah.
And as you've been able to see, if you've kept up with the series from the beginning, there's a lot of open-ended questions here, and we don't exactly have concrete answers for some things like you might think we would.
Mm-hmm.
um, you know we're still figuring out very basic topics like how did people live during the Paleolithic period. Like these are still things that are heavily debated today, and in just a short amount of time, like we're getting in research and we're going back to old research that had been forgotten, and we're finding out that, oh, we had things completely different than what is actually the case.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
so that was definitely a big fascination for me, and sort of a revelation for me, like doing this series, just kind of realizing how much we actually don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of realizing that a lot of like pop paleoanthropology books have like a very seem to have like a very confident narrative
Right.
about human origins. Sometimes like they'll state facts and things as if like, oh, this is just kind of, it's like a take it for granted, right? Like, oh, like this is a, we did research on this many years ago, so we feel confident talking about it. But it's like, well, no, if you actually like dig beneath the surface, like there's a lot of things that we don't actually know,
Yep.
and like
Mm.
it's not as confident as you might think. um so that was really like a big draw for this, for me doing this series
Mm.
too, and just kind of digging a little bit deeper into aspects of human prehistory that I haven't had the opportunity to look at all that much, or maybe it's not really talked about all that much in popular culture, to
Yeah.
kind of try to like bring into the forte. So
Right.
like for example, when we introduced Homo sapiens in episode 8, um I talked a lot about the Paleolithic, the Middle Stone Age of Africa, and the Late Stone Age of Africa, because those are areas that often are skipped in world histories. Or for example, when we talked about in episode 10, the road to the Holocene, following the end of the last glacial maximum. There's often a lot of areas of the world like between that time, from the end of the ice age to the beginnings of agricultural societies, that are usually like kind of breezed over, like, oh yeah, there were some people here who like lived in sort of complex hunter-gatherer societies, and then
Right.
there were people here who were more nomadic. And that's how things were, and then we jump right into agriculture. But it's like, no, like there's all kinds of little details there, and interesting things, and it's very complex.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I had fun researching that and presenting that to everybody. um and yeah, like just wrapping up that series too with the sort of the epilogue to the prologue, that was definitely a very therapeutic episode for me,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of being able to like look at the state of things like holistically and put them into context too, because often like when you're keeping up with the news about like the state of the world, the biodiversity crisis and anthropogenic climate change and whatnot, um, it can be overwhelming because it seems like there's multiple things coming at you at once. But to be able to take all of that and like put it in a box and just kind of like take it out one by one and go through it, it kind of helped stabilize me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all guys like, oh, like things aren't that bad. It's like, no, I mean, like there's still some major concerns to deal with. But at the, like I know that I can confidently like look at the problem as a whole, and I'm not as lost as I once was, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. Like, it's easy to kind of get lost in all of these studies, but now I have kind of I can come to grips with what's going on and a little bit clearer on things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts on Dinosaurs, the second chapter, and how you approach that series.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So I would echo a lot of the thoughts that you had on doing your series. So of course I knew most of the material pretty well, even before doing this series. But I completely agree, and I've thought for a long time that one of the best ways to learn about a subject is to teach it. And so of course putting this series together and just organizing this information, thinking about how to present it, I think has really solidified a lot of these concepts in my mind as well. Um, and yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of it for sure. Um, and with my series, I think a challenge, like I kind of mentioned towards the end of my final episode, is that there simply aren't that many resources out there that already do this job for me. Like many there aren't many resources that actually summarize the evolution of birds following the Cretaceous, and uh, yeah, so a lot of this I was basically doing, you know, from scratch or in a way that I thought was the best way to organize them. And whether I was right or not, well, that's a different matter. But um, I think in the end, I managed to put out a series that I'm pretty pleased with. And well, on the note of resources, I think Gerald Meyer's book is definitely a godsend in that regard. Um, but yeah, other than that, not much out there you can really turn to organize a series like this. Um, and yes, I do think as well that emphasizing uncertainty in science is very important, because yeah, that it really is part of science. We don't know everything, and that's exactly why we study these subjects, is to try and find out more about them. And sometimes we don't have enough evidence, or the evidence that we have is conflicting, and there just isn't any right answer. And I thought it was important to emphasize that when necessary in my series as well. And I also did want to get across the feeling that, yeah, there's a lot of basic stuff we don't know about birds. Like, even though people love birds and many people study birds and birds have been studied for a long time, there's still a lot we don't know, and so there's still a lot of room for people who want to study birds to find out more. Like one of my favorite examples is that we don't really fully understand how woodpeckers avoid rain damage when they're pecking at trees. And in many popular sources, you will find people like presenting certain explanations as being the definitive answer. But if you actually go to the scientific literature about this subject, there's actually a lot more discourse about it than you might think. And in fact, we're not even sure if they actually do avoid brain damage at all, as I mentioned in the episode where I covered woodpeckers, which was episode 12. Um, so yeah, there's lots to learn about birds. There's certainly lots to learn in my specific field of studying birds, which is avian paleontology and deep time evolution. Um, so yeah, I definitely wanted to emphasize all those things in doing my series. Um, and in some ways, I guess my series had a broader scope than yours. Like I was covering like over 10,000 species, right? And yeah, yeah, and like even all mammals put together wouldn't be that many. So yeah, I think my series ended up being rather sprawling, and I couldn't get into every group in equal depth. Um, but I think I hope I got across the general patterns of avian paleontology and gave a sense of their diversity in the modern day and in the past, and also highlighted some of the most interesting questions that we are working on regarding this subject. And just kind of deviating away from my series for a moment. Um, yeah, I thought your final episode was brilliant. That was just the best way to end this subject, and you covered all the very pressing issues very well.
Well, thank you very much. I like to think that I tried to cover as much as I could, and also kind of like intentionally, unintentionally, I made sure to leave you know some of that discussion for you as well, because I didn't necessarily cover issues directly affecting birds. I kind of kept it very general, like across the tree of life,
Mhm.
so that way you could. Cause I know you had mentioned to me fairly early on, like you wanted to cover like threats to birds, and
Mhm.
like in my head, like I wasn't thinking that while I was putting the episode together, but somehow I still managed to like not cover that territory.
Gotta subconsciously
So that's
retain
kind of
that information.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought you had covered the threats to birds fairly well too. Like you definitely like entered territory that I could have probably talked a little bit more about in my series regarding like the effects of like human architecture on
Mm,
wildlife and those sorts of and like human habitats on wildlife too.
right.
I kind of touched on like the precursors to that,
Yeah, yeah.
deforestation and that sort of thing. But like you went to like the next step and like how have we built modern architecture in a way that has like harmed animals like birds, for
Right.
example.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you definitely did a good job with that.
Well, I'm glad you think so. And I guess it is pretty appropriate that our series finales kind of end up complementing each other like that, because that's kind of where they converge, isn't it? Yeah, it's kind of where people and birds come together, and how we interact, and sometimes that's not in particularly good ways, at least for one or both parties. I feel like there's a lot that could be said about avian conservation, and I definitely did not go into a huge amount of detail about all the issues, but that's because it was kind of a section at the end of a very long episode. So yeah, that
Mm.
final episode of Dinosaurs, the second chapter, it kind of feeds into the fact about how sprawling and how broad in scope my series was. Ended up being like almost 5 hours as a recording, and I had to split it in half as two different videos just to make it seem less daunting. So yeah, it is kind of funny looking back on the lengths of my early episodes, because yeah, I think when we started, even like uh, we were
Yeah.
definitely going for like around an hour and a half, like 2 hours at most, for most of our episodes.
Oh yeah, trying to
And
be very cautious.
yes, and yeah, I was in my early episodes. I was definitely trying to be very stringent about that, and like I think the most obvious manifestation was in the Gallo and Saren episode, when we were talking about the chickens and ducks and their relatives, in episode 3 of my series, because that episode ended up being under 2 hours, even though like if I go back and count the number of slides, they are comparable to some of the later episodes that got way longer, like 3 hours or more. And and I have to wonder like how I was able to do that, because yeah, in all the later episodes, like even if I tried to speak more quickly and try to cover certain subjects, in less depth, like I would still end up with like 3 hour episodes. And yeah, it just got to the point that I was like, okay, these episodes are going to be as long as they need to be. Like obviously, I don't want to make them 5 hours all the time, but sometimes you just need that much time to cover certain subjects, and we're not really on a time limit here. Um, I know longer videos can be harder for some people to consume, but viewers are free to take breaks too. So I try to console myself with that. And we actually have had viewers who were like, oh yeah, we love the long episodes. We sit right through them and we think they're great. And well, I think it is very gratifying to hear that. I do know that the long episodes are not for everyone, but I am glad that some people do enjoy them.
Oh yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate that too, because I know like in like comparing other podcasts slash YouTube shows about natural history, or at least the topics that we talk about, they do tend to be long form content. Um, I know one of my inspirations for Humanity a Prologue was the Fall of Civilizations podcast
Mm,
by Paul Cooper, who is now converting his podcast into like feature length YouTube videos with
wow.
like images and maps and stuff. And I mean, he's done a brilliant job. I mean, his level of research is really impressive, and he always shares his sources. He's got a really nice, soothing voice, like a storyteller voice, as he's going through all these different societies. Um, and yeah, some of those episodes can like get up there. Um, I remember it was the Aztec Empire, the Triple Alliance. That one was notorious because that was almost 3 or 4 hours long to tell that whole story. And I remember like there was no way I was going to sit down. Like I guess at the time, like there was no way I was going to sit down and watch it all in one go.
Right.
But luckily, what I ended up doing was I was visiting my sister, who was then living in Raleigh, and from where I'm at, it's about like an hour and a half drive
Mm, right.
to, and then back.
Yeah.
Actually, no, nothing. I think the Aztec was a 3 hour episode. So what I did was like I started the podcast, listened to it the whole drive down, and then cut it in the middle, and then on the way back was able to finish the rest of it.
Right.
So that's
Right.
how I managed to make it work out. And I know some of you have commented like, "Oh yeah, like I put it on in the background while I do chores." I'm like, "Yeah, that's we appreciate that as well." I
Yeah.
mean, like the visual component of our show is really for like educational purposes. I
Right.
mean, it's definitely a lot easier to show and not tell. If you can do both, that's even better.
Hmm.
So we figured we'd go that route, and you can listen to us, but like if you're curious, like what these fossils look like, or
Right.
where in the world these places are, or some of these charts that we've shared, we put them there for you
Yeah.
to look at,
Exactly.
and we've gotten good responses from them as well. Yeah, like regarding length time, I certainly remember being very nervous about time because that was before I really like dug into like the different podcasts
Mm,
and just kind of accepted that these are as long as they need to be.
right.
Because in my series, like my first couple episodes were very short, relatively speaking,
Hmm.
because it was just trying to find material to talk about. I mean, the further you go back into hominin
Mm,
history, there's a lot more uncertainties and a lot less you can like definitively talk about, beyond like describing the fossils and describing some relevant topics like bipedalism, that sort of thing. um, so those ended up being like fairly short, but by the time I got to Homo sapiens and our history, it was now a question of like, what should I leave out
right.
because there's
Right.
just so much there. Especially as our species goes global, now you're keeping track of continents and just making sure like nobody's left behind, in in proper global world history as I try to do. And then I think by that point, like they had ballooned into like over 2 hour
Mm,
episodes
right.
at the very least. Like I know the longest episode was, I think it was like episode 10, and I think that was just shy of 3 hours if I remember,
Right.
because there was all the discourse about the megafauna that we had to talk
Oh
about,
yeah.
that sort of thing, and like that can, because there's so much to unpack with those topics that you kind of just have to just kind of sit and like, okay, let's break this down and go through it all.
Yeah. Definitely.
um, but yeah, I think going forward, as we've talked about, we're going to try to not do like 3 to 5 hour episodes
Yeah.
every time, But if it happens, it happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like yeah, there are definitely other reasons to avoid doing them. Like it takes longer for us to edit them, for example. But yeah, no, like sometimes it just happens. Sometimes you just need that long to cover a subject, and I think we kind of come to live with with the fact that yeah, that's a thing that happens.
Right.
But yeah, I think definitely in the future we'll try to lean towards the shorter end of the spectrum. But yeah, I think for our specific series that we were doing, they ended up working well enough.
Yeah.
Those were our respective series, and in many ways they were kind of what this you know this show is centered around. But both of them are complete now. And in addition to these series, we have also done 12 news episodes, one per month. Although we technically skipped January, but we kind of lumped it into February.
Right.
But in the end, we still ended up with 12 news episodes at this point. I think in many ways the format of those is one that's very familiar to us because they were kind of what we tended to do for Incidents and Reflections, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, except Incidents and Reflections was a weekly show, more or less, and whereas these news episodes are monthly. But yeah, that's basically what we did. We would pick out stories, new studies that seemed interesting to us, and then we would talk about them on Incidents and Reflections, and we would alternate, between us regarding like who picked what story and who leads the discussion on and whatnot. And so those are very similar in format. Incidents and Reflections was only audio and no video component, but other than that, everything is pretty similar. So I think we've gotten pretty comfortable with those. I do know I have noticed that the news episodes aren't as popular as our main series episodes, and that's fair. We do put. I think it's probably correct to say we put more effort into our main series, but I do still like doing the news episodes because for one thing they add more variety to this channel in terms of the topics that we cover. We've covered lots of interesting subjects that we don't get to cover in our main series that focus only on humans or only on birds. We managed to cover things like plants and beetles and
Mm-hmm.
geology and all kinds of interesting things. And there's lots of interesting things out there in the natural world. So I do appreciate that. And as someone who likes to keep up with science news anyway, it is a really nice way to kind of just review. Oh, what's this cool thing that I heard about over the past month, and try to synthesize that information. Um, so yeah, and something else that I'll mention that is that I think the news episodes are a good way to kind of take a small break from producing the main series and
Mm-hmm.
kind of catch a breather. So we still kind of produce some content, but it's not as hard work as producing our main series episodes, which require like reading through a lot of different papers um, and synthesizing all that information. Whereas for our news episodes, we each read two papers or so. So yeah.
Yeah. No, and those are definitely they're definitely a little bit easier to produce.
Hmm.
Um, Probably like the most difficult thing with the news episodes is picking the stories,
Yeah.
really,
Indeed.
because we kind of have I think it's an unspoken rule that if there's like a news story that's been like exploded on social media, it's shared everywhere, it's been talked about by a bunch of outlets, other podcasts, other YouTube shows, that sort of thing. We try to avoid those
Right.
because usually there's not really much new we can add to it that hasn't
Right.
already been talked about. So we try to find maybe stories that are no less interesting, but haven't really been talked about all that much. And I think that's kind of made it much more of a rewarding experience for me because I can go into some of these papers. And as you said, like there's topics that usually I'm not like right at the front gate, like
Hmm.
excited to like dig into it, regarding things like botany or entomology, which I'm interested in, but admittedly I don't keep up with as much as I do
Yeah.
with anthropology. That's probably my
Exactly.
biggest weakness at the moment. It's like when you stick to one field, um, sometimes it gets hard to keep up with everything else, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Hmm.
It's just for me personally, I like to kind of be familiar with multiple fields because
Yeah.
I value the interdisciplinary approach to solving problems and answering questions. I think, and I think a lot of people do as well, because I have read too many books where you have one author in one field who's trying to branch out into other fields to
Hmm.
talk about them, and they just do not do a very good job,
Right. Yeah.
or like they make simple mistakes, which is again is understandable, but it's like if you're at least like keeping up and like reading around,
Hmm.
that at least helps you like pick up on these sorts of things.
Right.
Um, and like I found many conversations with Albert where like I used to be very interested in dinosaur paleontology,
Mm.
and I still am. And I used to keep up with all the stories and all the news
Hmm.
about what these animals were like. But now I haven't been able to do that all that much because I've been
Right.
focusing on what's new in anthropology. So I have to ask you a bunch of times, like, what's the status on this dinosaur?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
how do we where are we at on this aspect of ecology or something like that, right?
Hmm.
And oftentimes, like the answers are completely different from what I was expecting because it's been a while.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think that kind of over specialization is a problem that a lot of people have. Like even if they don't intend to, become over specialized. Um, even scientists, I would say especially scientists, like we end up being really really good and have really really strong expertise in like one really specific thing, um, just because that's how academia tends to work right now. But yeah, I think it is beneficial to at least have a working knowledge of a wide variety of subjects because you get exposed to many different perspectives. You get at least some understanding of many different fields of study, and knowing all of these can help you in your own research or just in your own enjoyment and appreciation of the world in general. So I think it is important to read widely, and yeah, to some extent, I think specialization is kind of inevitable when you get into these subjects because
Yeah.
you end up concentrating on a specific thing, and there's only so much energy and memory you can actually devote to these subjects. But nonetheless, I do think that yeah, in addition to concentrating on your main subject of interest, I think it is a very good thing to go around and read about other fields of study as well. So yeah, no, I completely agree there.
Right. Um, but yeah, and again, like I guess just to kind of close my thoughts on those episodes. I mean, I am grateful that we have at least gotten some responses from them from folks, even though not as popular as our lecture series. Like I know we've had like people who worked on papers that we
Yes.
talked about respond to our episodes, like, "Oh,
Right.
you talk about this. This is awesome."
Right. Yeah. 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 We always appreciate those for sure.
Oh yeah, it's like we're looking out for y'all. We got you. Spread the word.
Right. Right. Yeah. So altogether, over the past year, we have produced over 40 episodes of our show, which is wow. That's looking at that number, like that's a quite a large amount, um, especially with all these episodes being over an hour long at least. Um, and yeah, I don't know if it's surprised is the right word, but I'm very happy that we've managed to stick with it for this long. And I will say that in fact I said over 40 episodes here, but that's not the same thing as the number of videos that we have made because for example, the last episode of my series is actually split into two videos, like I mentioned earlier. So, that's technically a plus one. And we also had the little short video about our Patreon announcement. But yeah, in terms of
Yeah.
like full-fledged episodes that we consider to be like self-contained episodes, it's like 41. So yeah, and we will continue to make more as we will discuss later today. And as for the audience kind of metrics, at the time of recording, we currently have 439 followers, and according to the numbers shown on our main channel, we currently have over 20,000 views, creeping up on 21,000 views. And yeah, I mean, those numbers are, of course, they're quite modest in the grand scheme of things. But I definitely think that when we set out to do this, we did not expect that much of a response. Like we didn't really set out to do this with the aim of becoming popular or anything like that. We just wanted to make these informative videos, and because that's something we like to do. And the fact that we have gained as large of a following as we have, I think it's humbling, and we really appreciate it a lot.
Absolutely, and we're very grateful to all of you sticking with us. Yeah, I share your sentiments, Albert. This definitely was a labor of love. We're not trying to be the next David Attenborough or anything like
Right.
that, but you know, we care about these subjects, and we want to share them with people. And the response we've gotten has shown me that like people are interested as well, and they want to learn about these things. And
Mm-hmm.
that just kind of gives me the encouragement to go forward and continue this as well. I mean, oh my gosh, to this day, some of the responses to some of our episodes, I'm still blown away. Like the Neanderthal one, I know that's like kind of the joke of the series. Like I'm still amazed that it got the viewership in such a short amount of time that it had.
Mm.
Um, and of course, again, we speculated that it was probably just the timing of it with things that were going on in the news,
Right.
um, that probably helped kickstart that. But still, I mean, Neanderthals, Denisovans are fascinating members of our family, and if it wasn't for popular, the things that were going on in the news, there is still like an immense interest in these subjects,
Yeah.
as well as others, and I'm all too happy to have helped, talk a little bit about them and maybe simplify some of the information that is out there for
Mm-hmm.
people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do know, looking at our analytics, that people do pretty often find our channel apparently by searching Neanderthals or Denisovans on YouTube. So yeah, people are out there looking for the information. Um, that definitely seems to be a common avenue by which people arrive here. So yeah, in any case, we appreciate all the views and all the comments, and yeah, some of your comments have been very kind, and yeah,
Mhm.
we are blown away by the positive responses. So yeah, it's all been really good. And now I'll watch us lose a follower right after uploading.
Oh,
I'm just kidding, but who knows? Yeah. It's okay. You guys, if anyone wants to unfollow for whatever reason, that's fine. People do that all the time, and yeah, yeah, we don't take offense to that. But yeah. Anyways, yeah. Do you have anything else to add about our, I guess, growth or over the past year, or anything like that? Mhm.
no, I think just to kind of close out on this, it's kind of like harking back to what you were talking about a little bit. I am very grateful and happy that I've been able to help out and work with this for as long as I have, and still go through with it with the level of enthusiasm that I had when I started it.
Mm.
I'm sure I'm not alone on this, but like sometimes like there's projects that you start and you're like, oh, this is gonna be great, and then like over time, life stuff happens or
Yeah.
what have you, and that interest just kind of wanes, and then the project is just kind of left on the shelf until
Right.
you get the itch to go back to it, and sometimes that itch never comes.
Yeah.
I've struggled with that in the past,
Yeah. Totally. Me too.
but yeah, but with this show, I mean, it kind of goes to show like because like the projects that I've done, like they've been different avenues and different visual styles. Um, but I think I've kind of found my happy place
Mm.
here doing a show kind of like this.
That's great.
And I, I just I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for everyone for sticking with us, and I'm kind of oh, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm uh I'm kind of relieved that like this is a project that has been successful so far,
Mm. Mm.
and I'm just flabbergasted. Ugh.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, yeah. All right. Well then, I guess with that, we can go on to the next section of this episode. That's going to be us answering the questions from you all that you sent in. So yeah, that should be fun. Should we head on to the next slide?
Yeah, let's do it. And
Cool.
hey, thank you all so much for sending these in to us.
Yes, absolutely. Um, so, the first question is from our friend Tristan. So he asks, my question for the Q&A is, how can I marry you both? I love all your content and adore the show. Um, Seriously though, how did you both get to where you are at in your careers now? Do you have any advice for people who might be entering their graduate and PhD years? And in parentheses, I promise to be your guy's first creepy fan. Okay, Tristan. Yeah, about the marriage thing, well, we could talk about that, but I guess regarding career advice, we could probably say a few things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I will probably defer most of this question to you, Albert.
Fair.
Because I mean, I'll be blunt. I am not a student anymore. Um, I got my undergraduate degree in anthropology from East Carolina University, and at the moment, like I have kind of floated through different jobs, and I'm still trying to kind of figure out that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I have my own feelings about graduate school,
Yeah.
and I mean, it would be nice to go and do that sort of thing. The funds aren't exactly there,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
especially since COVID hit, like
Oh,
my
yeah.
opportunities have lessened dramatically.
Yep.
Especially since things seem to be going up and down with that in my area. Like, oh, COVID cases are going down. Oh, nope, they're spiking again because they're going down, and people are like, oh, that means I can go out and not wearing a
Right,
mask
right.
and have a good time, and go to bars and raise a ruckus. And it's like, oh well, thanks to you. Like, what happens? What do I do? But uh, at least in my end, like I've still tried to keep up with research and just read, and follow research and just keep up with people who I've met in college. And
Mm.
at the moment, like that's kind of helped me out a lot. You know, it's helped me stay academic
Right.
even
Mm.
without being in academia. Um, so that's kind of like where I'm at currently. But Albert, you've certainly gone, you know, you've gone the distance with this.
I suppose you could say that. And yeah, I would agree that all of those things that you're doing are very good ideas if you, want to be involved in academia. Even if you don't end up going to graduate school. And yeah, no, like those are all excellent. Staying in touch with people you knew in college, including your former classmates who might share your interests or your professors, and also yeah, continuing to read academic literature and honing your reading and kind of information synthesizing and critical thinking skills. Those are all excellent things to do, and I think in fact they're probably good things to do even if you don't want to be deeply involved in academia because critical thinking and
Oh yeah.
having good reading comprehension, those are all excellent skills to have. Um, so yeah, that's great, and yeah, I definitely COVID has kind of scuppered a lot of opportunities for people, like, even more so than there normally would be. So yeah, that it's extremely unfortunate, and hopefully we can return to something resembling normalcy soon. But we'll see. People were saying this a year ago, so um, yeah. But you know, we'll see how that goes. Don't worry too much about things that you can't control, I guess. And so, all right. Well, what advice do I have? Okay, so I guess some just background information about where I'm at, and what I've done. I got my bachelor's degree in geology at the University of Maryland, um, and I graduated in 2016. Um, and then pretty much immediately afterward, I started a master's degree um, over on the other side of the pond in Bristol, in England. And that was a master's degree specifically in paleobiology, which was, it certainly is a very good training for an aspiring paleontologist. And that went on for 1 year. Pretty intense training program, but I appreciate it a lot. And then currently, I am a PhD student at the University of Bath in the biology department, and specifically, my thesis is about bird paleontology and bird evolution. Um, And so I've been working on that for the past 4 years or so, and I'm currently in my final year. In fact, I'm only, like about a month or so away from actually submitting my thesis to my thesis examiners, who are the people who are going to read my thesis and basically grill me with questions afterwards. Say, why didn't you do this? Or you got this wrong, you idiot. And then after they do that, they basically provide a recommendation to the school to decide whether I get my PhD or not. And so yeah, that's going to be what's happening for the remaining part of the year for me. Um, but yeah, so I'm currently about to finish my PhD, and so sure, I might have some useful things to say about this. Yeah, let me see. So all right, I guess my first piece of advice that comes to mind is that do a PhD if you want to do it. And I mean that sounds obvious, but like because a PhD is hard work. Like you're sinking like many years of your life into doing it. You're learning a lot of things on the fly, um, and you're you're producing new knowledge, right? Like you're like discovering things that previous people haven't discovered before or have overlooked, and that's not easy. And you have to do a lot of background research to actually understand what you're doing and the subject you're studying. But then there comes a point where it's like, okay, this is untrodden territory, so how do I actually do this? um, so it is hard work. But if that sounds good to you, if you are really passionate about doing research about a certain subject, yeah, go for it. Like, we really do. If you really want to do research, then yeah, go and get that PhD. Obviously, there are benefits to doing so. Like it does open up certain opportunities to get jobs in the field if you want to continue being in academia and such, and it gives you great experience in doing the research that you want to do. And okay, I do want to stress that yeah, sure, like maybe people there are probably plenty of people who go into a PhD and then they find out that oh, I don't actually like doing this, and then they go on to do something else, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But I do want to stress that before you start, like if you're not already in a PhD program already, like don't just jump into it without thinking. Like you really think about like whether this is something you want to do or not. Um, and so yeah, be passionate basically. Like if you're passionate about this subject, yeah, go for it. Um, Now, when it comes to like selecting a PhD, I would say that assuming that you have whatever resources are necessary to enter whatever programs you're looking at, um, I would say the most important factor, and I feel like this might be the most important advice that I have to give. At least I personally think that is that selecting a supervisor who will work well with you and be supportive of you is the most important aspect of selecting a PhD. Yeah, like you know, even if you like the subject a lot, if you have a terrible supervisor, you are going to have an absolutely awful, horrific time, and
Hmm.
that is, yeah, just not good. You're already under a lot of pressure. You don't want to add that extra stuff on top of that. Um, so how do you pick a good supervisor anyway? Well, oftentimes if you get the chance, you definitely should try to meet them in person at some point. So the way the application process usually goes is that you look around and look up researchers in the field who are working on the subjects that you're interested in, and you check to see if they're taking PhD students or not. And then if they are, sometimes people will say on their websites like whether they are taking students or not. Sometimes you might want to email them directly and ask them. But if they are, then you contact them and say, oh, so I am so and so. This is what I've done so far, and I'm interested in this subject. So would you be interested in taking me as a PhD student? And they might say yes or no depending on what's going on on their end of things. But if they do, if they do suggest that, oh, okay, you sound like you might be a good fit, maybe we could meet up and talk some more. Do take the opportunity to meet in person, or in these times probably it'll be over the internet by video call or something. But yeah, do take the opportunity to like directly talk face to face with a potential supervisor and try to get a sense of what they're like and whether or not they'll be a good supervisor to you, whether you hit it off with them or not. That's very important. And something else that you should do is to talk to their students, like either their former students or their current students, like just and separately from the supervisor, just ask them like, hey, well, what is it like? Yeah, well, what is it like studying with this supervisor? Is it good? And I feel like students usually want to help out other potential students, so yeah, we'll probably give you a pretty good account of what's up. So if there are any red flags, yeah. You probably don't want to go ahead with applying to this university. So yeah, be pretty sure that you're getting a good supervisor. Yeah, talk to the supervisor themselves. Talk to their students, either current or former, preferably both, really, since the current students can give you a sense of what they're currently like, and the former students, of course, aren't really bound much by by having to please their supervisor anymore. So they might be able to give you some honest opinions. Yeah, I think it is really important to talk to their students and get a sense of exactly what it's like. And maybe sometimes the supervisor is a perfectly good person, but perhaps their work ethic or their management style just isn't your thing, and that can be important to know. So yeah, just get as much information as you can, and it can be difficult because a lot of the stuff about oh, this person is a terrible jerk, don't work with them, like that kind of information is often like hidden like within the community, and like yeah, that can be tricky. So do try to like put your ear to the door if you can, and insofar as it's possible, and just be really sure that you are finding a good supervisor to work with. And I think that is probably the most important factor in picking a PhD program. Like it can be the subject itself can maybe not be exactly what you wanted to work on. Although usually PhD projects have some flexibility to them. But yeah, if your supervisor you know is a bad person, you're gonna have a bad time. So you really pay attention to that. Um, and let's see, is there anything else I can say? Well, I will say that luck and privilege do matter, and they can matter quite a bit. Sometimes people just don't have the resources to do a PhD program. Sometimes they can't afford to move to a far off land to get to their ideal kind of environment where opportunities are available, and sometimes opportunities themselves are scarce, like they are now. So yeah, I do think that privilege and luck can matter a lot, and I feel like I've been very fortunate over my life to have been able to not only have encountered good opportunities, but also to have been able to actually take advantage of them. So that's kind of an unfortunate aspect of the field and of, I guess, of life in general. But I will say that failure is normal. Is normal to get rejected from many programs. Like the first time I applied to graduate programs, like the first year I tried, I didn't get into any of the PhD programs I applied to. I did get accepted to the master's program in Bristol, and so I was able to go on straight onto that. But it is not at all rare for perfectly capable students to just get rejected from everywhere they apply to, and that's for a lot of different reasons. Um, but yeah, don't get too discouraged by rejections. If you really want to get into a program, just keep trying. And if you don't get into any place the first round of applications you try, maybe use the following year to try and gain additional experience that'll help make your application stronger. Like you could volunteer at museums, for example. You could join summer programs, internships, and such. Yeah, just do be on the lookout for opportunities like that, and take whatever opportunities come your way. And maybe in the second round, you have bolstered up your application with more of these activities, and perhaps you'll get in someplace, or perhaps a better opportunity will come up for you, and a better fit will show up, and you'll finally get into that place. Yeah, just don't get too discouraged by rejections. They are super normal. Everyone gets them. Even full-fledged researchers who are writing their grants and such, they often get rejected and don't get those grants that they wanted. Yeah, the rejection is super normal in academia. So just keep trying, and do know that a lot of it does depend on the luck of the draw. But yeah, keep trying. Do what you can to bolster your strength as an applicant. But don't worry too much about things you can't control, because you can't control them. I'll mention also that the second year I tried, like when I was finishing up my master's, I did get into the PhD that I applied, that I'm currently doing, but I got rejected like pretty much everywhere else. So yeah, I kind of got lucky. I'm glad I got into this PhD, because it's been really great. My supervisor is excellent. It's on a subject that I want to work on. It's just been a great time all around. But yeah, I know I'm really fortunate to be able to study what I want to under those conditions. And I think the influence of privilege, it really is a big issue in academia, as it is like in just about everywhere else in society. But yeah, people are working on it. People are working on trying to make the process more open and more accessible to everybody. But systemic change, unfortunately it does take time. So yeah, do what you can and keep trying. Be passionate about your subjects, and uh, learn as much about your supervisor or potential supervisors as you can. And I think those are the main pieces of advice that I have for this subject.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. It is kind of exciting hearing from you and from your stories, like as you've been doing your PhD, some of
Mm.
the cool specimens you've been able to see. And you've already participated in a number of really important studies.
A
I
few, yeah.
mean, with the Dinosaurs and Asteriornis,
Oh
and
yeah.
how exciting!
I, it is exciting, and that's definitely one of the reasons I really enjoy doing this. Like, even though it's a lot of work, it's tiring. I won't say like every second of it is fun, but I do love doing this in general, and I love learning new things about bird evolution. I love discovering new things about bird evolution. I love researching bird evolution. It's great. It's great. So if it's something you really want to do, like go for it, and do what you can to make yourself look like a strong applicant, and try to find you know the best fit that you can regarding your supervisor. But yeah, like just go for it. Yeah, keep going for it. If it doesn't work the first time, or the second time for that matter. Um, yeah. So that's my advice. Do we want to continue to the next question?
Yeah, sure. This one comes from our friend Alari, and he asks, for Albert, you have an opportunity to meet some giant fossil birds. Who you would like most to meet in person and why? And then for Joan, uh, for me, if you ever met a fossil Homo, say a Neanderthal, and assuming you understand each other perfectly, what would you like to talk about with them?
Ooh.
Oh, this is an interesting question. Alb, let's see. Well, some giant fossil birds, huh? Is there a minimum for what counts as a giant?
Yeah, well, he didn't specify, so I'm just gonna assume. But yeah, let's see. It's some to meet some giant fossil birds. Wow, that's a great question because there have been a lot of really interesting giant fossil birds, in the history of birds, as we discussed several times,
Mm-hmm.
in the Dinosaurs, the second chapter. I guess if I had to pick one, um, I think it would have to be Pelagornis, which has the largest wingspan of any bird of all time. So one of the largest flight-capable birds ever. So I would say that counts as a giant bird. And I guess to put some numbers on it, the largest species of Pelagornis is thought to have had a wingspan in the vicinity of around 7 meters wide or so. So yeah,
Wow.
huge flying animal. And in fact, I think Ilari's avatar here that we put on the slide is supposed to be Pelagornis, or at least a close relative. Um, so yeah, so I guess just for those who aren't familiar, the Pelagornithids are a group of extinct seabirds. They're pretty much always found in marine rocks. Um, and many of them were huge, like mentioned earlier. So even the ones that were, not as big as the big Pelagornis were something in the range of like 4 or 5 meter wingspans. There were some that were smaller than that, but many of them were big birds, and their probably best known feature other than their size was the fact that they had a series of tooth-like projections, sharp tooth-like projections along like the edges of their beak, and these were not true teeth. They were not made out of the same materials that you'd find in actual teeth, but they were like outgrowths from the beak itself. And would have been covered in keratin like the rest of the beak was. But they looked a lot like teeth, and in fact, some paleontologists have hypothesized that maybe they actually share developmental processes that with actual teeth. So basically, they're using the processes developmentally that would make teeth in their mouth if there were any teeth there, but there aren't any teeth there, so instead they just turn their beak into like these teeth like shapes, and so they look really gnarly. Probably these tooth-like spikes in their beaks were very useful for catching prey items, and as they were seabirds, they were probably like catching things like fish or squids and things like that, and really long wings, so they were probably able to soar over the ocean like effortlessly and just travel great distances. And in fact, they've been found on every continent in the world, including Antarctica. And yeah, they also lasted for quite a long time. Like the oldest ones that we have are around like 61 to 62 million years old, and then
Wow.
they lasted all the way up to the end of the Pliocene, the beginning of the Pleistocene. So early STEM humans would have perhaps seen them if they ever wandered over to the beach and saw this massive bird just flying high in the sky. Well, what an amazing sight that would have been. Um, so yeah, I think it would have to be Pelagornis as my pick, and the reason for that is just because they are so different from any of the other birds that we know about. Like nothing today has like pseudo teeth quite like that. Like yeah, there are some birds with like serrations in their bill, but they're not quite like as tooth-like as they are in Pelagornithids, and furthermore, in most of those, there isn't any kind of underlying bony structure to the serration. So, for example, a lot of geese often have these like tooth-like projections inside their beak, but those are like keratin, purely keratin. There is no like bony core to those tooth-like projections. But in Pelagornithids, there were. So if you look at Pelagornithid fossils, like even when the keratin is not preserved as it usually isn't, you can still see very clearly those tooth-like projections lining the edges of the beak. So very unusual, and furthermore, we don't really know what Pelagornithids are. Like, traditionally, it was thought that they must have been closely related to other large soaring seabirds, like pelicans, for example. Um, but in more recent times, a lot of people have pointed out that well, actually, they lack a lot of key features um, of neo-avian birds. So neo-avian birds, as you know, if you've watched through all of Dinosaurs, the second chapter, are 95% of all birds. So they're pretty much all birds except for the ostrich-like birds, the duck-like birds, and the chicken-like birds. Um, and Pelargonithids have some features that are not characteristic of this group, so they might actually be outside of the neo-avians and not that closely related to like many of the other major water bird groups. But where they belong outside of that is still a matter of debate, and we're not really sure. Like many different studies have found different results. Like people have found them close to ducks or equally close to ducks and chickens. Some people think that they are like equally close to neo-avians and the duck and chicken clade. So yeah, we are not sure what they are. So I would love to see one in person and see what they were actually like in life and see if that actually provides any clues as to what they were and that big mystery. And it would be amazing to see this gigantic flying bird do its thing. So yeah, how about your question?
Well, I mean, it's a very great question as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just stick with the Neanderthal for now, because you mentioned Neanderthal, so I'll go with that. Um, I think I would just go full ethnologist with them. I would ask all the questions relating to society and culture. Like how do you understand the world?
Hmm.
What are your belief systems? Do you have like do you organize by kinship? Are you matrilocal? Is marriage a thing
Hmm.
in Neanderthal society? Um, you know, Aspects of like tool making, like what is your thought process behind making certain tools? Because we know from Neanderthals that they were working with they were making composite tools, and they clearly were making materials that are far beyond what earlier hominins were working with. Like they were making glues and they were making nets and just remarkable stuff.
Hmm.
So I'd be very curious as to like the things that aren't really preserved in the archaeological
Oh yeah,
record.
totally.
Like and like of course I guess it would depend on like what type of Neanderthal I talk to, because we know from genetic studies that there were like fairly distinct populations in say the Levant as well as like in Western Europe
Hmm.
or east all the way into Siberia. So like is there variation there? Like is there contact between these different groups? Like do you guys engage with trade with any of these groups? Are you familiar with the wider world? How much of that knowledge has been stored? Oral traditions, that sort of thing. Do you have any like folk heroes,
Hmm. Hmm.
monsters, that sort of stuff? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that would be great. The famous Neanderthal who like was the first to do this thing,
Hmm. Right. Right.
and yeah, I just like to kind of go all in, share a meal and see what the life is like for a Neanderthal, and like it would be very helpful too because again, the Neanderthals plus the Denisovans are our sister lineage. We share a very recent common ancestor, about 8 to 600,000 years ago or so, give or take what studies you look at,
Hmm.
and you know they were technically our ancestors because all humans today share Neanderthal DNA from extensive interbreeding,
Hmm.
including in Africa. Um, that doesn't mean, of course, we did not evolve from Neanderthals, but those lineages have crossed so much that the lines from extant to extinct are almost blurred to an
Right.
extent. I mean, obviously, like no one today has the Neanderthal phenotype, and they certainly don't have the complete Neanderthal genotype. And there are no Mousterian cultures around anymore, and so it's a very interesting area to look at there regarding the human story. Because if we can find out some things about Neanderthals, then of course we can ask the big questions like, oh, okay, well, are these features shared with our common ancestor, or did we each develop cultures on our own terms and they just so happen to converge in certain areas? Which is a subject that I've been reading about. I I guess just to kind of update from the last episode, I finished Rutherford's The Book of Humans. It's very great,
Mm-hmm.
and I was definitely impressed by some of the questions he was asking. Because again, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, thinking about questions that you never thought to ask,
Mm-hmm.
like, can cultural items be convergently developed?
Mm.
And the evidence that he provides, looking at the other animals of the world, seems to be the case for a lot of things. And so, and there's nothing to suggest that the same couldn't have happened among hominids. Just because different individual species were, say, making aesthetic objects, or like they were making certain stone tools, doesn't necessarily mean that that had only started once and then just like continued with all descendant groups. They may have had multiple origins, which has some very interesting connotations regarding like the evolution of cognition
Mm-hmm.
among hominids, for example. So I would love to explore those sorts of things too. And I guess just to kind of round out the question a little bit, going further back in time, I mean, I would certainly like to do similar things with other hominids and see how far I can go. Uh, Obviously, like we can't talk to chimpanzees and bonobos,
Mm-hmm.
um, but from what we've been able to study about them, they seem to have cultures of a sort.
Right.
Um, but then we look at the extreme opposite end of the great apes with humans. Our cultures and our societies are ridiculously complex,
Right.
and so it's a question of when that complexity well, not so much was kickstarted, but like what were the rungs of that ladder
Yeah.
towards the sort of complex societies that we have. And I would love to like go through different hominid groups. You talk to Homo erectus and Ergaster and Habilis and on to like the Paranthropines and see how much I
Mm-hmm.
can glean.
Yeah.
And I think that would help answer a lot of questions and probably raise a bunch more as well, because knowing how this field works, every answered question opens up, 50 other questions that are like,
Yeah.
well, and what about this or this?
Right.
Um, I mean, you can just look at the ethnographic literature, the rich diversity of cultures just within our species, as well as like the phenotypic diversity as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just imagine what was going on just 50,000 years ago when we were sharing the planet with Neanderthals and Denisovans and Floresiensis and who knows what else.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's about what I would ask. Just go full ethnologist, talk about culture with them and see what we can learn.
Yeah. That's an excellent answer, I think.
All right. If you don't have anything else to add, we can go to the next question.
Yep. Sounds good. Um, Okay, our next question is from another friend of ours, Meg. Okay, so this one's a pretty straightforward one, perhaps. They ask, why are you both such awesome people and such wonderful friends? That is very kind, and I'm glad you think so. um, I guess just to add a bit of like self indulgency in there, like I I feel like this is probably obvious, but I definitely feel like compared to my younger self, I think I've grown to appreciate more the importance of treating others well and being kind to people and trying to put yourself in their shoes and such. And I mean, yeah, that's super basic, obvious stuff. Everybody knows that you should do that. And of course, it's not like I usually try to be mean or anything, even when I was younger. But like, yeah, I definitely increasingly as I've grown older and seen more of the world and become more integrated into like quote unquote adult society. I feel like it is very important to do all those things and um like it just makes for a better world for everybody and it's it yeah and really like I think one of the influences on that is in fact my PhD supervisor because his number one rule for the lab is be nice to people and having seen how some of the people in our field behave I think that is very important
Oh yeah, and Yeah, I think I'm in sort of a similar boat. Uh, childhood was always an interesting thing for me, and
Mm-hmm.
even like going into college,
Yeah, yeah,
I could tell that there was still some stuff that I had to work out.
right.
Um, and I think it definitely helps, to surround yourself with people who, well, for one, genuinely care about you
Mm-hmm.
and would like to see your well-being as best as possible,
Right.
in the best condition, and who will understand when you're having, rough patches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Albert, I certainly, oh my gosh, do I have stories with you? Um, but definitely, like, I'd say within, the last decade or so, at least towards the latter half of the decade, I've grown a lot. I've changed quite a bit. You know, coming out as trans, of course, was a big
Mm.
deal, and it was made much easier because I had, stuck with these friends who I had met online, over through the paleo community and in various related fields, and oh, it was just nothing but support, and it showed me, what kind of person I could be,
Mm-hmm.
and share that with others as well. Be there for people when they need me, and even if they don't need help, just listen. If you want to vent, you want to hang out, and just tell me about your day. Um, I'm here,
Yeah. Mm.
and I think that has helped me a lot as well. And yeah, I mean, it really does go to show because in studying anthropology, and which is essentially how humans work 101. Which, spoiler alert, we're still trying to figure out
Right,
a
right.
lot of stuff. But one of the most immediate things that I've noticed and I read about is that oftentimes people make choices and it's through their own fruition, and sometimes like there's a cultural backing to it too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, like growing up where you are will influence how you feel about things.
Mm-hmm.
um, and with a field like anthropology, you kind of learn how to navigate those aspects of your past, and as you said, like, go see somebody through their own shoes. um, and that has also helped me in a sense to kind of feel for other people and try to be a better person,
Mm-hmm.
because goodness knows there are plenty of examples throughout world history of people being really shitty to each other,
Yeah. Mm.
and the last thing we need is more of that.
Right.
So anything you can do, even if it's fairly small, even if it's just one person, I think makes the world a lot better, and
Mm-hmm.
it shows that things don't have to always be the way they are. You can go forth and, to put it in a sort of cliched way, be the change you want to see in the
Yeah.
world.
Mm. Yeah. Couldn't have put it better myself.
And of course, we are, thankful to have a friend like you, Meg.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah,
thank you for your
absolutely.
question.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Should we continue onward?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, this next question is from our friend Henry,
Mhm. Who does a theme
who
song?
asks, yes, our good friend Henry, we thank him very much for that. And he asks, if you could have any species, modern, prehistoric, or future, as a pet, assuming you could meet all its care requirements, what would it be?
Ooh.
That's a really good one.
Yeah.
um, hmm. Yeah. Albert, why don't you go first?
All right. Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question, the way it's formulated, because, yeah, normally if you get, like, oh, if you could have a hypothetical pet kind of questions, like your main concerns, or at least my main concerns, would be like logistics and practicality and all of that. But that's not really an issue with this question at all, because you specified if you could meet all of its care requirements, no matter what it is,
Right.
basically. So it could be literally anything. And so in the end, I feel like this question ends up kind of being like, what's your favorite animal? um, now, I guess in some ways it's a little different because there are other considerations you can make, like what do you get out of being able to keep like any kind of animal perfectly in a captive setting. Like maybe you could get to observe some interesting behaviors or something and learn more about it and document that for scientific research. I think that could be a pretty good motivation. Of course, there are a lot of animals that we know very little about, so I think that doesn't narrow it down too much for me. But I guess to give my answer, I feel like I'm gonna lean heavily into the what your favorite animal, what is your favorite animal side of things, um, but also motivated by wanting to learn more about those animals. I'm gonna go with an albatross because well, I like albatross a lot, and also there's a lot that we would like to know about their biology. That we've been able to figure out quite a bit from what we have, but being able to like observe a living specimen in person and see how it goes about its day, I think that would just be wonderful. Um, and I guess my other pick would be Asteriornis, just because that's also a personally significant animal to me. But also, it has a potential to tell us about what the lifestyle was like in early crown birds, and that's also a subject that I'm deeply interested in, of course. So yeah, so an Albasaur or Asteriornis would be the answer that comes to mind for me.
Oh, it's pretty good. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, comes a bit of a conundrum because favorite animals. Oh goodness, how do you narrow
Right.
that
Yeah.
down?
Not easy. Not easy for me either. I mean, I know
Right.
like albatross are up there, but I don't think I could honestly pick like a single species as my favorite. Yeah.
Right, and being the kid, and obviously, like you're included into this as well.
Hmm.
Who grew up with all these big, giant animal
Oh
encyclopedias,
yeah.
and you could familiarize yourself with so many different animals of the past and present. Yeah, it's hard to narrow it down even into like a top 10 list because then it's like, oh, well, what about this or what about this? Um, oh gosh. Well, I have thought about at least one answer to this question for a good chunk of my life. I thought it'd be really cool to have a thylacine as a pet.
Yes.
This is the famous Tasmanian tiger of Tasmania, which was the largest marsupial carnivore of recent times. After the extinction of all the megafauna, whenever that happened,
Hmm.
um, and it was a very well-known animal. It had a very tragic history of persecution by human hunters,
Yeah.
because people got into their heads that they were going out and killing livestock when a lot of that was suspect to begin with. By the time like people started to look at these animals from a conservation standpoint, they were all pretty much gone.
Hmm.
The last one dying at the Hobart Zoo in the 1930s
Yeah.
at some time. Uh, Benjamin, who I
Hmm.
guess we're not sure what sex they
Yeah.
were,
Right.
because which is kind of a funny discourse. You have people looking at that footage like, is that a penis? I don't know. Um, is that a pouch? I can't tell because thylacines, they're one of those marsupials where the pouch points backwards,
Yeah, that's right.
which I believe is supposed to help with like, well, I mean, this is an explanation I've heard. I don't know if it's actually valid or not, but
Mm.
it's supposed to help like protect the babies when they're going through the brush.
Mm.
Um, but I have a suspicion that is a suspect explanation. But of course, it's not exactly a way that we can test that now.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Despite multiple people claiming that this animal is not only still alive but has been photographed, which we don't have to go down into that.
Yeah.
But
That's the whole thing.
I mean, I always thought that they were interesting animals. I mean, they're quite literally marsupials trying to be dogs. Even if the way that they hunted and the way that they ate their food was very different. These were not bone crunching animals that ran down their prey.
Hmm.
From what observations we have, they seem to have like stalked their prey and pounced at them, and then they would eat at like the soft underbellies, and they wouldn't exactly like crunch the bones or anything like that. So it's a very unique animal.
Yeah.
Um, and it would be interesting to kind of like clarify some things first of all. Some of the behavior that we don't know about these animals.
Yeah.
Um, and also, like, I mean, there's purely selfish aesthetic reasons too. I mean, I think they're very pretty animals. Yeah, it's like a dog with like zebra stripes on
Yeah,
its
yeah.
back. It looks cool, and I mean, it would be cool to have that, walking around your house and going out for walks.
Right.
I'm sure they're probably very, cuddly animals too. Some of those classic photos of all the babies snuggling
Mm.
together. Oh, it's adorable. Um, but yeah, oh, let me think. One thing I know we talked about a little bit is it would be kind of cool to have like something from like the Cambrian or the
Yeah,
Ediacaran.
right.
You get a nice tank and you can kind of figure out what the heck these things were doing on a daily basis. Because some of these animals are just bizarre. If they're all animals, that's I know that's been
Right,
a
right.
dispute for a while. At least regarding the Ediacarans.
Yeah.
The last I checked, I think some of them have been determined to be at least animals.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's just a question of like where on the family tree do they go? Are they
Right.
a lineage that left no descendants, or are they some sort of antecedent to
Mm-hmm.
one of the major groups?
Right.
Because a lot of them look like worms, but like looks like worms. Worm is a very grab bag term for
Yeah,
like
right.
the standard animal, the
Exactly.
standard bilaterian.
We are all
It's a
Dr.
tube
Worm.
with a mouth. Yeah,
Yeah.
we are. We're all just hollow tubes
Mm-hmm.
with modifications on the outside. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's still so many unknowns. I mean, just using the Cambrian for example, like some of these animals, like we've been able to figure out like at least where they are on the family
Mm.
tree,
Yeah, right.
but there's still questions regarding like how they fed or how they protected themselves, their forms of locomotion, um, the ecology. General ecology. Like that's certainly an interesting question.
Mm.
Who are the grazers? Who are the scavengers? Who are doing a little bit of both? Um, so I think that would be kind of fun to have,
Mm.
like having a tank to look at. My personal favorite of the Cambrian crew is an animal called Sydnea,
Mm.
which is an arthropod, one of the joint-legged animals with exoskeletons, like insects. I it's for a completely basic reason. I think they're cute. They have a really big head with the eyes way on the sides, and they look kind of like a millipede
Mm.
if if you cross a millipede with a shrimp and then you just flatten it
Right.
into a pancake
Yeah.
with a little tail on one end, and that's basically what that is. You're welcome to Google it
Yeah.
to see for yourself. But I just think they're really funny. Um, I don't know. What about you with Cambrian critters? Do you have a
Oh,
personal favorite
Cambrian
there?
critters. I think hallucigenia is probably uh my favorite that comes to mind. Um, yeah, that's a nice classic one, I think. Plus, I do like velvet worms a lot, and it is currently thought that hallucigenia is a stem velvet worm. So, yeah, nice connection there.
Right. Yeah. Like picture a velvet worm, which is it's on the same lineage as the arthropods.
Yeah, close relative.
It's kind of it has like a soft, yeah, it's got like a soft, well, it's got a velvety feeling body, which I guess is where the name comes from.
Right.
Um, they're still around today. They live mostly in tropical regions because they survive on moist conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a snail thing going on, right? Um, but then you look at hallucigenia. This is an aquatic species, a marine species, um, but it has like spindly legs compared to like the little teddy bear legs
Yeah.
of, of a velvet worm.
Right.
But it has these huge spikes that
Mm-hmm.
comes up like on the top half of the animal. And for the longest time, when this animal was found, like this is a famous story. Like we didn't know which side was up.
That's right.
So if you look at some like older books, you'll see these stilts with little tentacles wooing around in the water to collect debris. And this is supposed to be like something that left no descendants. It's like, what if it was the famous example for Stephen Jay Gould,
Mm.
the famous paleontologist, who was like, if you rewound the tape of evolution, you know, and you brought it back to like the Cambrian, and what would happen if these things survived, and like say chordates or arthropods didn't, what would life look like then?
Right.
And then it turns out like, oh yeah, we found more fossils, and oh, we got it upside down. It's actually a fairly standard member of the velvet worm
Right.
line, just with decked out spines. But it's still no less weird. It certainly has earned its name,
Yep.
hallucigenia.
Mm-hmm.
looks like a hallucinogen. It's like something that you would see after smoking something. Um, but yeah, let's see, modern, prehistoric, or future. Yeah, future animals. That's a bit of a tough one because I guess you could really kind of go anywhere with that.
Yeah.
Um, I guess thinking of like known future animals that have been like created in speculative zoology. There's the famous book After Man by Dougal Dixon, which is like what the world would look like 50 million. I think it's 50 million years in the future. Um, it's supposed to teach about biogeography, but it uses like animals that have survived the die off of the megafauna in the present day, and who would take places of what. And they had these penguins that became fully aquatic, like they no longer needed to go on land. It's basically doing what whales did.
Mm,
Penguins that turned into whales. And
right.
there's this one called the Vortis, enormous penguin with like a right whale head, and it's supposed to take up the niche that whales originally took up. But of course, in this timeline, they've all gone extinct. So the birds have taken over where the whales and dolphins used to. Um, I think that would be kind of cool to have as a
Mm,
pet.
yeah.
Of course, I would give it. I mean, because me all its care requirements would mean I would just let it live in the ocean and see it every weekend or something.
Right.
I'm not putting that in the tank because I have my feelings about that.
Mm,
Um, but it'd be a cool animal to see.
mm,
Just how would a bird solve the problems of dealing with as we talked about in the I believe it was in the penguin episode
probably,
of
yeah.
your series. It's like there, and then at least in the Stristories one, like what are the challenges to a bird to like become fully like a fully airborne animal or a fully aquatic animal?
Right, right.
And it's like the biggest hurdle is just eggs,
Yeah.
right?
Mm,
And dealing with, like, how do you go from a shelled egg to potentially live birth or something completely different,
mm-hmm.
pouches or whatever.
Right, right.
That would be kind of cool to see. Um, but yeah, otherwise, I mean, there's certainly plenty of other animals I'd love to have as pets. I
Yeah.
mean, using more moderate example, I mean, the capybara. I
Oh.
love capybaras. I know people keep them as pets. I don't know what the backstory is with them, if they're actually like good animals to have as pets or not.
Mm, mm.
I haven't seen too much discourse about that, but they're cute and they're kind of fun. They're like a chill dog that just kind of moves on its own pace
Yeah,
and
they're guinea pigs the size of
likes to
dogs, pretty
nibble.
much.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I never had the opportunity to have a guinea pig, but
Mm.
this would be like the ultimate guinea pig.
Right.
Well, except I'm being fair, the ultimate guinea pig would probably be like a Joseph Ortega or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. But that's a more
One of the
distant
giant
relative.
rodents. Right, right, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but that's yeah. Otherwise, I'm just gonna be rambling. Yeah, thylacine, Cambrian creatures, vortex, capybara. That's at least what I would think. That comes to mind immediately.
Right, right. Yeah, those are good choices. And yeah, like you said, we could be here all day if if we actually went through the whole list of everything we wanted to potentially keep. Because yeah, like I said, there are a lot of animals out there, and there are a lot of good reasons that you might want to keep one in this scenario. So yeah, I think maybe we can go on to the next question. How about you?
Yeah, sure. But
Yeah.
thank you very much, Henry. This
Yep,
was a fun one.
indeed, very much so, and hope you enjoyed our answers. All right. So, the next question is from Denver. Stegosaurus, good boy or best boy?
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, Stegosaurus. I mean, it's a cool dinosaur. It's my mom's favorite.
Nice.
Uh, it's certainly. I mean, like that whole group of dinosaurs itself is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think I'm curious if this is where the question is kind of going. Like, Stegosaurus out of the Stegosaurs, is it the best or is it just good?
Yeah, I guess for me, I do think like stegosaurs in general are really cool, and they're obviously very distinctive looking. They have all these interesting features, um, and yeah, and we do have some idea about how they function in certain respects, like their potential defense capabilities and the way they fed and such. So and a lot of the things are really interesting. Um, But yeah, in terms of like Stegosaurus specifically, among the Stegosaurus, I would say it's pretty good. It probably isn't my favorite Stegosaur. I feel like Miragaia might be my favorite. It's a weird long-necked Stegosaur from Portugal, um, but Stegosaurus itself, it's pretty good. It's pretty damn good.
Yeah, I do like Miragaia too. It's a fairly new dinosaur too. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember when that was announced.
Right, like in the 2000s, yeah.
Yeah, because see, the thing about Stegosaurus is, and you know what, we should probably link in the description. There's the show that we really love, Your Dinosaurs Are
Oh,
Wrong,
yes.
on YouTube, and they basically kind of go through like classic dinosaur toys, like you would grow up with. Well, we certainly grew up with, and they use them as a teaching opportunity to go into like the actual biology of the animals
Hmm.
concerned, and like they pick apart, the tail, the legs, the head, the body, and you go from like this dime store toy to the modern
Right.
understanding of the animal, and it gets it tries to be as very accurate as possible. And they've done like updates since that
Yes.
time.
Mm.
So like they had a Stegosaurus episode, um, and then the study with Sophie came out.
Right.
That specimen that's on display now in, I think it's the Natural History Museum in London,
That's right.
and it just completely, like, maybe not completely, but like it really changed the look of
Yeah.
Stegosaurus, because a lot of those specimens that we've gone back to and studied were like composites, I think,
Yeah, that's
or
right.
like they were using different animals and the proportions were off. That's how you got like kind of the hunchback, head to the ground, tail dragger that you've seen in a lot of popular movies and books, and some newer ones as well,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But with Sophie, and so like that being said, like we found other stegosaurs since then,
Hmm.
and they were all very weird. They all had long necks. They had spiny plates
Yep.
and spikes on their tails and spikes on their shoulders, and they were all very weird. And Stegosaurus was the odd one out because
Right.
it looked like this, while everybody else kind of like they looked fairly standard with like different shades of spikiness, I guess you can
Right.
put it
Right.
that way. But with the Sophie specimen, now all of a sudden Stegosaurus kind of fits
Right.
into this collection. Like it has like a longish neck and it has a much lower body than is traditionally reconstructed. And so Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong went back and did an update to that episode
Hmm.
and talked a lot about this. So we'll put those two in the description if you want to, if you're interested in a little paleo art history there.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, like now with that, it's like now that the whole group is more or less similar now. I honestly don't know. It's hard for me to tell. I'd say Stegosaurus is pretty good. But yeah, like you, I am partial to Miragaia. So I think for me, Miragaia is probably the best boy, and Stegosaurus is a pretty good boy.
Yeah, Stegosaurus is still kind of weird in lacking the back spikes and the no evidence of shoulder spikes. But yeah, the proportions
Right.
now are a lot more consistent with the other Stegosaurs, so that's pretty interesting. Um, and yes, I'll have to echo that Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong is absolutely brilliant. It's very well researched, and the animation is amazing. Like, my
Hmm.
opinion is that if you can only follow one YouTube channel in the world, you should follow Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong. Like, I'm just unsubscribe to us right now. I mean, like, but yeah, like, if you're interested in paleontology, like the number one YouTube channel to follow is Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong, in my opinion. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and the host Steve and crew, they're just sweethearts.
They are really
They've
nice
done a
people.
couple live,
Yep.
yeah, they've done a couple live streams. I think there's like a Discord chat too, and
Yep.
you can send in toys, and this is actually kind of funny. It kind of reveals the kind of person I am. I love You Dinosaurs Are Wrong, but I think my favorite episodes are the ones where they unpack all the boxes that they get shipped and they just go through all these different toys, because some stuff that they send is like really bizarre toys.
Yes.
Like, um, I don't know if this is an appropriate term, but they have the Chinosaurs,
Oh right.
which are like,
Yeah.
they're like the sort of open mouth, roaring, mouthful of teeth things that would look more, more with would look would look out of place among dinosaurs and more appropriate with like kaiju, that sort of
Yeah,
stuff, right?
right. Yeah.
And I used to have a bunch of those too. Oh my gosh, funny thing, animals that weren't supposed to have spiked teeth or even teeth to begin with, their mouths are full of teeth.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like he'll sometimes get some of them, and some of them are just bizarre looking the way they've been designed. It's like the person just did like a dinosaur from memory, or had only seen like, or like just trying to guess like what a dinosaur looked like. It's not even like they looked at a picture of like a stegosaurus, like, oh,
Right.
a dinosaur, big lizard, okay, has plates and spines, okay, cool, and then they just went to town on it.
Right.
What it looks like.
Yes.
But sometimes just like really like obscure stuff too. Oh, there was one episode that somebody sent them like an exclusive Disney World dinosaur cup.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the 2000 film Dinosaur with the iguanodon Alabdar, which, oh my gosh, I know that movie's kind of got like a mixed reception. I love it. I had the bedspread. It was a big deal when it came out.
Right.
It's something a cup, like a collector's cup, and it's like I wouldn't even thought that such a thing existed. And it's just kind of fun, like seeing the reactions to it. And people are sweet, like they send him like letters, like, "Oh, I love your show, and I drew you all these dinosaurs,"
Right.
and like they go through the drawings, and just it touches my heart. So yeah, big tangent, but definitely great show, highly recommend. Even as like an introduction, I think it'd be a fairly good introduction to dinosaurs too.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, because like Steve goes and explains like what the animals are,
Right.
like right at the beginning, and some of them are probably very familiar, and others maybe like backhanded knowledge.
Yeah.
Like if I name drop like Spinosaurus or Parasaurolophus, I might need to like elaborate a tiny bit, like, oh, that's the one with the sail, or oh, that's the
Right.
one with the crest. And it's like, oh, I've seen that. But they're starting to do like more relatively obscure to popular culture, like non-dinosaur fan popular culture. Like they did a Margosaurus episode, which is really cool. This is a sauropod with these large spines that come out of the neck, the top of the neck. And it's like, you know, what are these for, and how do they look in life? Because you have the interpretation like, oh, it's like a sail, double sails going down the back. And it's like, oh no, these are just like freeform spikes. That makes more sense anatomically. And again, going back to my earlier statement, you know, I don't even know what the status is on that.
Yeah, I think the current consensus is keratinous spikes. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought, but you gotta make sure. Right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I guess to go back to your question, Stegosaurus, pretty good boy, but not best boy.
Unfortunately. But yeah, we do think it's pretty good, and that's doing pretty well. Because yeah, like we said, picking favorites is not easy for us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But we appreciate your question, and we hope you don't mind our slight our rating.
Yeah. Right. Alrighty, let's continue. So this one is from Joan's sister Julie, and she says, "I'd love to learn about how different cultures originally interpreted the discovery of fossils."
Oh yeah,
That's a big one.
Yeah, did some research, took some notes for this one. Jules, this is a really great question. And it's a fascinating question too, because you know, you do have to wonder, like when you go through world mythology and you see all these fantastical creatures, and some of them that look, you know, fairly similar to fossil animals that we've found in more recent times. You know, the question does beg, you know, it's not as if people only just started finding fossils 300 years ago or what have you. You know, there must have been times before that where people found fossils, and before they had, you know, before they had any understanding of like what a dinosaur is or what a mammoth is. You know, they certainly must have like tried to interpret these bones, you know, in the context of their own world. And so but like, do we actually have evidence for like some of the more, you know, classic monsters of mythology? You name drop dragons and Cyclops, for example. Like, you know, do we actually know whether those were inspired by prehistoric animals or not? And so yeah, we'll explore a little bit of that for you. certainly just right off the bat, yeah, humans seem to have been aware of fossils for a very long time. Even before Homo sapiens was a thing. Um, One of my favorite examples of this are some Acheulean hand axes, which is stone toolkit that's dates back at least it's like 1.7 million years ago or so, and is often found alongside Homo erectus and Middle Pleistocene humans, among others. Very distinctive toolkit. And some of these have been found with shellfish fossils right in the center of the tools.
Mm.
There's one from 250,000-year-old rocks in Norfolk, which is in England, and it has a Cretaceous spiny oyster or a spondylus, and it's right in the center of this tool, and you can tell that the tool has been carefully chipped around it so as to preserve the shape of the fossil, like in the middle of this thing. And there's an older one that's like 400,000 years old. That's from Kent, so not too far. And it has a big sea urchin in the middle called a
Mm.
convolvulus. And the fact that tools like this exist, it seems clear to many researchers that these early humans had aesthetic reasons for making stone tools, otherwise had practical uses, but they look cool. They have these falls at the center. It's like custom design your knife with like flames on the edge of it or something, right? Or like a fork in the shape of um, I don't know, a trident, right?
Mm.
People were getting experimental with their tools, way back in the day. And then of course, other later societies, belonging to like Neolithic times, for Homo sapiens, they show the incorporation of fossils too. You have sea urchin fossils as grave goods. And they're buried like right around the body as it's laid to rest. Really beautiful
Mm.
tribute there. But as far as this is concerned, we're looking at fossils of fairly recognizable animals. I mean, we have sea urchins today, we have spiny oysters today. Big whoop, right? But what about like a dinosaur bone or like a mammoth bone? That's the question that we're really kind of looking at here. And it turns out that the answers we have are honestly, for the most part, a bit unclear. So, let me think. There was one really popular suggestion that the griffin, which is the sort of a chimera of sorts, it's a lion or a big cat with the head of an eagle or the wings of an eagle,
Mm.
and there was a link proposed with griffins to a horned dinosaur called Protoceratops that lives in Mongolia. It's in the same group as Triceratops. It's a lot smaller. I think sheep sized is the term that's used. Now, of course, how big is a sheep? Well, it's like uh, uh, 2 feet, 3 feet tall, something like that. Not a big animal. Um, but this proposal dates back to a paper in 1993 by these two paleontologists, Adrian Mayer and Michael Heaney. And Adrian Mayer, in particular, is a big name in this discourse. She has written a number of papers looking at the connections between world mythology and fossil animals. And so they wrote this paper, and their explanation was pretty basic. So Greeks living in the 600s BC were well aware and made contact with the Scythians, who are a pastoralist Iranian speaking people that lived on the steppe lands north of the Black Sea. We talked about them in episode 12 of Humanity, a Prologue, in the context of the non-Mediterranean European societies, you know, uh, during the early ages of urbanization, who usually kind of get the short end of the stick in world history. But it said that the Scythians were supposed to have spawned the legend of the Griffins, who are associated with gold, and they would bury their eggs with gold. Now, of course, they were inspired, so the story goes, because the Scythians too mined for gold. We see many different archaeological sites with gold artifacts. And they're supposed to have come across these skeletons of Protoceratops. And when they saw the eagle-like beak, the clawed feet, and the projections of the frills, which, if you're kind of squinting, they look kind of like the bony structure of a wing.
Mm. Mm.
The Scythians thought that they had found these lions with eagle parts, and hence we have griffins. And then, of course, the Greeks took those ideas and spread them into Europe, and the rest is history. Well, it sounds like a neat little explanation, except for a couple of things. So, first of all, the origin of the griffin goes much further back than the Scythians or the Greeks. There were many societies in Southwest Asia as well as ancient Egypt, and we're going beyond 3000 BC, and they had griffin legends. And the associations with the griffins to their cultures are actually less well known. We don't actually know, you know, what griffins were supposed to mean to people like the Sumerians or the Egyptians, for example. And of course, the Greeks had been engaged with these cultures as well as the Scythians during these 600s BC. So that's not to say that the Scythians are the only ones who had kind of the hold on griffin mythology, right? And then secondly, and this is perhaps the most important, the Protoceratops fossils aren't known in the north of the Black Sea. They're found in Central Eurasia, yes, but far to the east of this part of the world. They're in Mongolia, and so like that main connection is already like snipped when you consider that sort of thing. And then, of course, there's the famous argument about the Cyclops that you've mentioned from Greek mythology. If you've read the Odyssey, you know the Cyclops well, Polyphemus. And that there's the argument that the Cyclops is inspired by ancient Greeks finding elephant skulls. They originated in 1914 with a paleontologist called Othenio Abel. Now, an elephant's trunk doesn't have any bones inside of it. It's a nose. It's all muscles and nerves and skin. And so that means, like, when you look at an elephant's skull, you have this big nares or nasal hole in the middle of the skull between the tusks, which the Greeks were supposed to have interpreted as the orbit or the eye socket for a singular eye that would have belonged to this enormous human-like monster. But again, the links seem to be much flimsier than at first sight. If you look, first of all, at Greek artwork depicting Cyclops, or Cyclopes as they're called in plural, because there was more than one, there's nothing to suggest that they were particularly elephant-like at all, much less in their skulls. A Cyclops looks like a big guy with an eye. There's no sign of tusks or anything like that. And it's like, well, why just the skull? I mean, surely if an elephant died, maybe there'd be more bones around, and the skeleton does not necessarily suggest a bipedal animal of any sorts. It's like a quadruped, right? So it's kind of like weird that like it's just the skull that's associated with this and not the rest of the body. I mean, the Greeks were not scientists like we are today, but they certainly understood animal anatomy to an extent. I mean, you look at Aristotle, for example. He had a whole book about animal anatomy where he just went to town on the different features. And even like back in the day, people, hunters and farmers like preparing meals, like they would have known like what a bipedal versus a quadrupedal animal looked like. So there's that. And in fact, like, of course, stories of one-eyed people can be found all over the world, even in places where elephants live. So it seems unlikely that all of these people found elephant skulls and thought, this is a very large one-eyed dude. So the elephant skull argument seems to complicate things more than is actually necessary. It seems then like, rather than say Protoceratops inspiring griffins or elephant skulls inspiring cyclops, these are better explained by peoples taking inspiration from living animals and outside peoples in the genesis of these mythical creatures. For example, if you look at the artwork of griffins that we have from Southwest Asia and across the Mediterranean, well, they don't all look the same. They have significant variation in forms. Some have lion faces, some have eagle faces, some have lion paws, others have eagle talons. It seems clear that there wasn't just one founding myth for griffins. Different peoples developed their own griffins from neighboring animals. And with the Cyclops, I mean, ancient Greek peoples have exaggerated foreigners in many ways, often with purposeful dehumanization. That's kind of what that film 300 was exploring a little bit. That's why when the Greeks would go to like the Persian army and they had like monsters and demons and stuff, they're like that's all on purpose. The people did not look like that. They didn't necessarily think that the people looked like that. It's just a way to kind of get them on their side, right? And of course, given the treatment of the Cyclops in Greek stories like the Odyssey, this seems like a more plausible scenario for their origin. Now, it can't be ruled out 100%, of course, that peoples in this part of the world didn't observe fossil bones and incorporate them into their mythology. But at the moment, like, definitive concrete links can't be made at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, another popular mythical creature that you also mentioned is the dragon. And I mean, there's been a huge connection in popular culture between dragons and dinosaurs. Because, I mean, if you really think about it, like, dragons are nothing more than souped up dinosaurs that can breathe fire. Some of them can fly around, right? And dragon myths are known all over the world, just as Mesozoic dinosaur fossils have been found all over the world. But again, even here, the links between dinosaur bones and art depicting dragons doesn't always appear concrete. In China, with a rich tradition of dragon lore going back to the earliest dynasties, there are written accounts that appear to depict people digging up dinosaur bones. A piece from around 350 AD by a Chu Chong, who was a Chinese scholar, records the excavation of these really big bones from the present day site of Sichuan province. And they're referred to as dragon bones, and they're related to this legend about dragons trying to fly to heaven only to find locked gates. And so, in response, they fall to their deaths and sink into the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Sichuan province is known today for providing paleontologists with fairly good dinosaur bones, but we also find younger fossils from Cenozoic deposits as well.
Yep.
And this is where things get interesting. Now, dragon bones are still sold in Chinese markets today, as far as I'm concerned. They're treated as traditional medicine, right? You grind it up and you eat it, and it's supposed to treat all sorts of stuff. This is nothing new. Now, there was little investigated work on these recovered bones by the Chinese beyond the question, okay, were these from a living or a dead dragon? But these bones were very valuable and important to the Chinese and were consistently referred to as dragons. Okay, but once Western scientists began to explore this during the 19th century and connect it to what they had been learning about fossils and the anatomy of living animals, they were able to make more concrete connections. And it turns out that most dragon bones that have been studied and found actually come from fossil mammals. Things like horses, deer, elephants, bears, hyenas. The largest ape that ever lived, Gigantopithecus, was discovered as dragon bones in a drugstore in Hong Kong back in 1935. And the famous Peking man, which is a representative of Chinese Homo erectus, well, that was uncovered in a place called Dragon Bone Hill, near the village of Zhoukoutian. So, as far as we can tell, no dinosaurs were recorded by Western paleontologists during these examinations. And so, long story short, the Chinese legends of dragon bones seem to have been inspired mostly by fossil mammals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, that's not to say that legends of the dragons themselves start and end with fossil mammals. I mean, they seem to have undergone much the same chimerization of living animals that griffins may have gone
Yep.
through. If you look at the depictions of Chinese dragons, I mean, you have traits from turtles, snakes, and fish, different birds, and mammals ranging from deer to tigers to rabbits.
Yep.
They run the gambit. Now, European dragons, as well as those from other parts of the world that are probably a little bit more familiar with in places like the United States, they may very well have more to do with this sort of phenomenon than with the deliberate excavation of fossils like dinosaur bones. When you see like depictions of dragons, like there's a lot that screams living lizards and snakes,
Yep.
and sometimes crocodiles too. But again, much like the issues surrounding the griffin and the cyclops, these proposed links are currently untestable, without concrete evidence from ancient cultures. What would really be good is if we had like art depicting like an excavated skull that was labeled dragon,
You're
and
right.
it from like a young Schwannosaurus or something
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that would be a little bit better. Now, that's not to say that all of these links are basically lead to nowhere or lead to places that you weren't expecting. It has been argued that many place names in the pre-Columbian Americas have been inspired by fossils, including trackways. And there's quite a few examples of this. And so just to kind of go through some examples, we have Big Bone Lick, which is in Kentucky, which is named by the Wyandot or Huron after the large amounts of mastodon bones that had been unearthed there. And then there's Skeleton Mountain in Sonora, Mexico, where the Yaqui found the weathered bones of Pleistocene megafauna that were said to be the remains of a giant bird of prey that had been killed by one of their ancestors, and so left its bones to litter the mountainside. And then, of course, for the Dine or Navajo, the place of the bird track refers to an area where early Jurassic dinosaur footprints had been found.
Yeah.
And I can keep going. So it seems very clear that Native Americans across North America, at least, were aware of fossil bones, which seemed important enough to record in name and in legend, too. And one of the most well known associations of indigenous peoples and fossils comes to us from the Badlands of the Midwest, where the Oglala, which is one of the Lakota or Sioux nations, had their legend of the Thunder Beasts. Now, it was said that during the time of European expansion, when the bison herds were being diminished, very famously, the Oglala had hope in the Thunder Beasts, which would jump in the sky and make it thunder. And this would sort of help corral far flung bison herds towards the Oglala hunters. And when all this was said and done, the Thunder Beasts would descend from the sky and vanish into the earth. Now, in the Midwest, there are the bones of very large megafauna called brontotheres, which are perissodactyls. That's the odd-toed hoofed mammals, and they're related to the horse lineage in this case. But that lineage also includes the rhino and the tapir.
Yeah.
And bones of these guys have been found in really great collections, having died due to the ash from volcanic eruptions usually, which that the Rockies were very volcanically active during that period of time. So when Western scientists began to study the rocks of the Badlands, well, they regularly worked with the Oglala, and they associated these bones with the legends of the Thunder Beasts. And so today, the name Brontothere honors that association because that's exactly what it means.
Yeah.
It means Thunder Beast. So yeah, and like in the centuries just before, the scientific understanding of fossils, there were still individuals who attempted to find, genuine mythological explanations for uncovered bones, associating, for example, mammoth and rhinoceros bones with unicorns, as was done in Germany during the 1600s to the 1700s. But it was during the 1800s that a really intimate knowledge of living animals allowed people to really see just what fossils were. And of course, the rigorous study would provide us with a real look into what these long extinct animals were like. But I think, if anything, just to kind of close here, what this little brief tour with a little bit of debunking, of the global understanding of fossils tells us is that, wherever there have been fossils, there have been people who tried to explain what they were and place them into their knowledge of the world. So I think going forward, while we can never say with 100% certainty that, some horned dinosaur inspired a griffin, or elephants inspired cyclops, or dinosaurs and mammals inspired dragons, what have you, this is still an area of like great speculation, and there's always going to be some uncertainty around it. But I think many paleontologists would agree that it's within the realm of plausibility that some of our more famous legends come from fossil bones. We just can't say that that's exactly what it is. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question a little bit. Albert, if you have anything to add about that.
I don't have much. That was an excellent summary about many of the best known examples and alleged examples. I guess one more I'll add that's pretty well known is ammonites in medieval Europe. So ammonites are an extinct group of mollusks, so they were closely related to squids and octopuses, and but they had shells. So these shells would fossilize, and they were coiled shells, looking a bit like a snail shell or the shell of a nautilus, which is another one of their extant close relatives. And in medieval Europe, people interpreted these fossilized ammonite shells as snakes that had somehow turned to stone because they looked like a coiled up snake, basically, but they didn't have any heads. So actually, people would apparently sell ammonites as like these petrified snakes, but sometimes they would like carve an actual snake head on the end to make it look more complete. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's another well-known example of like early interpretation of fossils before we really knew what they were. But yeah, other than that, that was great. An excellent tour. And hopefully that did answer your question indeed.
Yes, thank you again, Julie. I appreciate it.
Alrighty. Shall we go on to the next one?
Yeah, I believe we have one more
I think
question.
so. Yeah. Okay, so this one comes from Adam, who is a frequent commenter on my work, so good to see you here. So he asks me, what neglected or poorly known fossil bird would you like to restudy? Wow, that's a great question because there are a lot of fossil birds out there, as we covered in our series, that could use more study. Um, so I have a bit of a I do have a couple of actual answers to your question, but I do have a cop out kind of preamble to that, and basically that is I think we should actually focus more on foundational work um, in avian morphology before we dive too deep into trying to figure out what all of the fossil different fossil birds are. Well, we can incorporate the fossil birds as part of those studies, but I think we really need a deeper and more detailed understanding of a lot of aspects of kind of bird skeletons, like what's the actual variation of the different features that are out there, and what are the features that actually identify specific phylogenetic groups and such. There's a lot out there that we still do not know in those fields of research, and I think we really need a lot more people doing that kind of foundational work on extant birds before we can better understand a lot of these fossil birds. So yeah, and there have been a lot of recent papers, for example, by Gerald Meyer, who is an incredibly prolific paleontologist and probably the most prolific bird paleontologist in the world alive today. Possibly ever, and he has written a number of papers that's just focused on like this one specific feature in the bird skeleton. Like here is the hypotarsus, for example. We talked about the hypotarsus a lot in our series. It is this little knob that projects out from the bottom of the foot in birds in the ankle region, and like he has like an entire paper which is just all about like this is what the hypotarsus looks like in different groups of birds, and that's an entire paper. And the thing is, like that kind of work hasn't really been done much in by previous researchers. You'd think that something this basic, like this feature that is common to all modern birds, has been already been examined thoroughly by previous workers, but not really. Like people have taken some notice of like specific features that can be found in specific groups regarding this particular piece of anatomy, but yeah, like a kind of detailed documentation of what's actually the variation that's out there, and does any of it tell us about how birds are related, or is there any functional significance to any of these features? That work really hasn't been done, and of course, Gerald Meyer has been doing quite a bit of it, but even then, there's still plenty of work left to do, and it is in fact what some of my own research has been focusing on. So yeah, I think a lot of that foundational work still needs to be done. But as to your actual question about like what specific fossil bird I would like to restudy, if I could, I have a few examples that come to mind. One would be Protoplottus. Protoplottus is a bird from the Eocene of Indonesia, one of the few fossil birds known from Indonesia, and it is known from nearly complete skeleton, but it hasn't really been written about or restudied, as far as I know, since 1989. I think that was when the last paper that was like focused specifically on it was published. And so That's quite a shame because it's known apparently from a very good skeleton, and so if we were able to approach, it with the knowledge of birds that we have now, I think we could uncover some pretty interesting information. And so currently, Protoplottus is thought to be some kind of water bird, and most likely closely related to cormorants and boobies and that part of the tree. Um, but yeah, like I think in terms of exactly what it is, that still remains to be figured out. And I think potentially being an early Eocene bird, it can be very informative about the potential evolution of that group of water birds. So yeah, I think that would be a pretty good option. That's a long neglected a species that would be fun to restudy and has potential implications for the origins of some of the living groups. Another one might be Salmilla. Salmilla is a bird from Germany that is known from a couple of pretty complete skeletons. Um, and it was in its early descriptions, it was thought to be a stem seriema, so closely related to these South American predatory birds that are also closely related to the terror birds and such. Um, but basically, like it also has features from some other groups of birds, such as the gruiforms, the crane-like birds, and it hasn't really been included in like a framework, a modern kind of phylogenetic framework based on like how we know birds are related now. So I think that could be an interesting one to study, and potentially also has implications for kind of what the early members of certain modern lineages were like. So yeah, so I guess the takeaway is I think more foundational work on bird anatomy in general needs to be done at the moment. I think that should be a greater priority than getting to the bottom of all these fossil birds, even though I deeply want to know what a lot of these fossil birds are too. But if I got the chance, I think Protoplottus and Salmilla would be some good choices for poorly known fossil birds to restudy. All right. Do you have anything to add before we move on?
No, I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about like throughout the series that for that your series, that's the second chapter. I mean, there's certainly quite a few birds that are very mysterious,
Right.
um, and I imagine like that's probably the tip of the iceberg regarding birds that we really should be looking at too.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely appreciate your comments regarding like more foundational work, because I've noticed in anthropology like there is sometimes issues with that
Mm-hmm.
regarding like a lack of attention to foundational studies.
Right.
Um, one of the ones that I'll just mention briefly that came to my attention over Twitter over the years is the lack of citation towards ethnographic field studies, which are works that go to different peoples around the world and record basically everything that there is to know about them. How the societies are run, their kinship terminology, that sort of thing. And without this sort of foundation regarding like how different peoples around the world behave or act or think about certain things or run their societies, without that, like you often have people making very blanket statements about, oh,
Mm-hmm.
humans are typically like this,
Right.
or in most traditional societies or traditional forager societies, people act like this. And what you learn is that most of these are either based on like one or two like famous studies from back in the day,
Right.
or
Right.
they're just straight up hand wavy, statements that
Yeah.
kind of are pulled out of thin air,
Right.
which
Right.
is not how you want to deal with this sort of stuff. If you say like, there was one when I was putting together, the readings and the notes for episode 8, looking at nomadic forager societies, and a common term that you'll hear is like, oh, um, there are no arranged marriages
Mm.
in nomadic forager societies. It's not a thing that exists. But then, like, if you actually like look at the literature and these ethnographic studies, it turns like, oh, by the way, there's marriage is almost ubiquitous
Right. Right.
across forager societies. Like, people get arranged marriages all the time, and if people don't like people that they marry, like sometimes like they have the privilege of being able to like leave and divorce, and other times is like such societal pressure if you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to marry.
Right.
Oh my God, there was an excerpt from one study that just floored me. I forget what societies. I want to believe it was one of the Central African forager societies in the Congolese region. And this girl just did not want to get married, and she did not like any of the guys in the group. To which her mom responded by literally grabbing her by the ear, putting her in the middle of town, and being like, "You ungrateful little brat! If you're not going to get married, you're going to disgrace your entire family,
Oof.
and nobody's going to love you." And she, this girl, of course, is crying and is just sobbing, and eventually she's like, "Okay, okay, I'll get married.
Wow. Yeah.
Keep loving me." And it's like, yeah, like that stuff is, I mean, if you want to get personal, like that's kind of extreme, but it is a thing that people go through.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you ignore all of that data and you make these sort of hand wavy statements about, the things that people do in general, well, then you're being inaccurate, you're being wrong, and you're missing a lot of important data. And there is a desire by a lot of cultural anthropologists that, people who are writing popular books or just, scientific papers in general, like that they look at like ethnographic field studies, they look at like cultural atlases, which exist, that they go through different societies around the world, and they check off a bunch of boxes regarding like, which society has this, which society doesn't have this. And you get those raw numbers, and then you can go about talking
Right.
and formulating hypotheses and theories about, human behaviors.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, in anthropology, we definitely have issues with the lack of foundational work too, because even though it's all there, nobody's combing through it.
Right,
It's
right.
all like, sitting in some university library somewhere, or it's treated as like, oh, well, that's old stuff. We want new research now. It's like, well, for a lot of these societies, there is no new research because their society's completely changed.
Right, right.
And you're missing some important data. So yeah, I definitely feel you there.
Yeah, definitely. I imagine it's probably an issue in all kinds of sciences, and yeah, it's certainly an issue in paleontology in general, not just with birds. Uh, like oftentimes you'll see studies where people will say, "Oh, we applied this method and we were able to figure out that this extinct animal does this," or something like that. But then you ask, "Oh, okay, so have we, tested this method on modern animals and see if it works there?" And and they're like, nope. And it's like, yeah, like you yeah, I get it. Like you want to jump straight to try and figure out the extinct animals, but it is very important to apply this stuff to modern animals first and see how it plays out. I think kind of a ground truth is that, as we say. So yeah, it is important to do this foundational research, and I think that's something we should be focusing on for sure. All right, so that's the last question I believe that we received, and so thanks everybody for sending in your questions. You've given us a lot of really interesting topics to think about and talk about, and I hope you enjoyed all of our answers. So before we conclude, on the next slide, we do want to discuss some of our future plans for this show, because like we said, we already completed the two main series that we wanted to complete while doing the show. So, what's up? What's next? So I think one of our main projects going forward is that we're actually going to be building a companion website to the show. Like, we love doing the show, and I know a lot of, at least based on your comments and subscribes and views and such, a lot of the viewers out there like our show as well. But I do know that kind of the video slash sort of podcast format is not for everybody. And we do still want to get this information out there to as many people as possible, as many people who are interested as possible. And I have run into cases where I've had friends who tell me, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice if there was like all this accessible information about the evolution of crowned birds?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it would be nice. Have you checked out my podcast?" And they're like, and they're like, "Oh yeah, but I don't really listen to podcasts very much and such." It's like, that's perfectly fair. Podcasts aren't for everybody. So what we want to do is we kind of want to compile all the information that we have provided from these podcasts onto a website format, basically, where we will write out the information in hopefully an accessible manner, have some accompanying images, links to resources, further resources where you can read more about this information. And plus, we can supplement with additional information that we might not have had time to get into in our shows. It'll also be easier to update the website. Like, for example, we're going to do our annual update episodes for our series where we recap all the major kind of discoveries that come out and would require us to update what we had already done. But in some ways, it's going to be a lot easier for us to like incorporate these changes into a website if we manage to build this website. So I think that's summarizes a lot of the motivation for us to build this website, so we can, for one, reach even more people, include even more information that we didn't get to include, and also facilitate updated information. So yeah, we are going to be building a website to accompany the show, and it's probably going to take us at least a few months to get it ready for the public, because as you know, if you've sat through our series, there's a lot of information packed into those videos, and so to kind of write it out in an accessible manner, I think it's going to take quite some time on top of other things that we need to do. So this does mean that we will be releasing videos less regularly. But before we get into that, do you have anything to add about our website plans?
Oh yeah. I guess just to kind of like reiterate, like this will certainly be like an ongoing project for us as we work on the show over time. Um, and I mean, we were really inspired, yeah, like to do this sort of thing because I mean, growing up, like there were a number of websites that we would use as resources to
Mm-hmm.
supplement like books or movies or whatever that we would watch about these
Yeah.
subjects.
Mm.
And they all had their pros and they all had their cons. But the one thing, no matter what, is that they were up to the minute and they were very engaging.
Yeah.
And so we want to try to bring a little bit of that as well into this series and just make it really like easily navigatable too. I mean, yeah, we'll include images, like we'll try to define terms as much as possible. Um, we'll lay everything out, and it'll really be a resource. Now, of course, there is a question of like how encyclopedic we'll go.
Mm-hmm.
Don't expect this to be like a new Wikipedia or
Right.
anything like
No, no, we're not trying to do that.
no, but nonetheless, it'll still be like as helpful as Wikipedia, maybe a little bit easier to go through as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we're definitely excited for that and our plans for it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'll add a couple of things, and that is that the image shown here is a basic skeleton, so it is subject to change. Don't
Oh yeah.
necessarily expect the end result of the website to look like this. This is basically just something we put together really quickly so we could show an image of it. So yeah, that's a basic skeleton of the homepage, but yeah, don't get too attached to it. And yeah, like you said, I feel like in the age of Wikipedia, I think this kind of like personal website, like run by one person who is really passionate about a specific kind of topic, and then kind of presents a website um, that becomes a very useful resource. I feel like it's getting rarer and rarer, just because Wikipedia is so convenient. But I
Yeah.
feel like there's still a place for it. For websites like this, and I hope we can kind of contribute to filling a bit of that gap. And like I said, in my case at least, there aren't many popular resources available for like Cenozoic bird evolution. Like most of the Wikipedia articles on Cenozoic fossil birds are very brief if they exist at all, and oftentimes very out of date. Um, and I know like I could go fix them, but like that takes time. And having to like match the Wikipedia format and then trying to do the like summarize everything that's known about specific species, that takes a lot of time. And while building the website is going to take time too, I feel like we can build a website in a format that's that complements what Wikipedia does, and it's we're not trying like Jones said, we're not trying to be another Wikipedia for these subjects, but more more personalized kind of a resource that summarizes a lot of these major topics, maybe in a way that's less comprehensive overall than what Wikipedia does, but is potentially in some ways more accessible, and in maybe in some ways like more of a synthesis of the resources. Like
Yeah.
Wikipedia has rules that are like you must say what the source says basically when you cite these sources, and you can't like draw interpretations between different sources because no one in the sources actually said those things like that, whereas in our website we can kind of go more into that side of things, like do more synthesizing work, gather together what summarize what all these different sources say, and instead of just listing out this source A says this, source B says this, source C says this, into a really sprawling kind of format. So yeah, expect something more like that. I guess for me at least, I feel like um, uh, I'll probably be inspired. I guess we were probably pretty inspired by if you've seen Dr. Thomas Holtz's lecture notes on his website. He has
Mm.
like notes for what he discusses in his lectures on, say, like dinosaurs or paleontology in general or historical geology, where the website format is very simple, but he just lays out the information out there, and everything is explained very clearly, and sometimes in a very personable manner. So yeah, something like that, where we're is what we're going for.
Oh yeah, and I think just regarding like the humanity of prologue
Hmm.
side of
Yeah.
things, like the synthesis is definitely very important because I mean a lot of this information is everywhere,
Right.
and sometimes it's hard to tell which is more reliable source than others.
Hmm.
Because I know some paleoanth websites like they'll do the whole like, oh, we'll go through all these different fossils and tell you what they are, but they
Right.
sometimes lack clarifications on like discourse and like
Hmm.
as if every paleoanthropologist agrees with this interpretation
Right.
when that is clearly not the case for a lot of stuff. Also just like availability of information
Hmm.
too. Like I didn't even think to mention this, but with Gerald Meyer's book for your series,
Right.
one of the best resources I had for figuring out humanity of prologue is textbook People of the Earth, an introduction to world prehistory by archaeologist Brian Fagan and Nadia Durrani. It's in its 15th edition now. So they've made a lot of these, and they're always like updated each time, especially with like the human prehistory, well, the human evolution aspects of things. But it's a textbook, and it's a heck and a lot of money,
Mm.
and not everybody's going to, pull out their funds and get it as a resource
Exactly.
in the way that I have. I got it because I really needed it, and
Right.
of course, it's been a big help in like putting together the show. Um, but like, I'm able to take information that is otherwise locked away in here, and I can synthesize it and put it out there for all of you for no cost at all.
Hmm.
And regarding anthropology, like I can find resources that most people aren't going to seek out and use that as well. So yeah, it's an important and hopefully it'll be a very helpful way to get sort of this cutting edge information that's behind a paywall out there for all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely echo those thoughts, and yeah, same here. Really, like I think Gerald Meyer's book is an excellent resource for you know for what I was doing with Dinosaurs, the second chapter, and for my research in general. But it's pretty much the same deal. It's an expensive book, so like if you are not actually studying bird paleontology, you might not be as motivated to actually look into it. And like I mentioned at the end of my series, when I was trying to make recommendations for different resources related to my topic, my main topic. That book is somewhat like it's semi-technical. It's like intended for people who want to get into the academic side of this topic. So I'm sure like a very well-read layperson could handle it, but again, like it is intended to be a somewhat technical reference, um, and so even if someone did have it, maybe the information is still not the most accessible it could be. Um, so yeah, uh, we definitely want to make this website, to fill that kind of gap that is currently out there for both of our main topics. Um, so what this means for a video release, yeah, because we are going to be focusing on making the website for at least the next few months, like I mentioned. We're no longer going to stick to a strictly weekly schedule. We've been more or less releasing videos weekly for this past year. Like we've taken some breaks in between, but most of them haven't been too long. So yeah, we're not going to release videos weekly anymore, at least for the foreseeable future. And I would say personally, like to me, I think it was always going to kind of be this way because, like I'm finishing up my PhD. I don't have a confirmed position, like where I'm going to go next yet. But when I eventually do, hopefully land a place, I don't know how much time I'm going to have to work on the show. So I think having a more spread out release schedule is going to be helpful to allow me to continue to be able to do the show. So I do think we're going to move towards a less frequent release schedule in the future. But that doesn't mean we'll be stopping completely, as we shall see. Do we want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
All right. So yes, because we do in fact still have plans to release videos occasionally. It just won't be as frequent as we have been doing for the last year. So we will still be doing the news episodes every month. We mentioned reasons we like doing them earlier. So yes, we will still be doing monthly news episodes. At some point, we will do an updates video for Dinosaurs the second chapter, like Joan already did for Humanity a Prologue, because same thing with my series. There have been relevant studies released over the year that I've been making the series, and so there are some worthy updates to some of the things that I said in that series, and I'll go over some of these new studies in that updates episode, which we'll release at some point. We have plans for some basically shorter videos that we intend to upload to our channel at various intervals. We've decided to call these time slices. So these are going to be excerpts from our existing episodes, where we focus on specific topics that we think might be interesting to viewers, because like we said, our episodes are really long, and of course we know that not everybody has the time or the patience to sit through such long videos, but they might still be interested in some of the topics we talk about. So we kind of want to isolate like segments where we kind of discuss specific subjects and release them as standalone kind of videos on the channel. And yeah, if you've seen all of our episodes, you will have seen all this content before, the time slices, that is. You have seen those videos before, but maybe it'll be helpful if you want to find like when we are discussion about a specific subject or things like that. And finally, we do have some preliminary plans for interviews with other people, because like we constantly say on the show, we're definitely not experts in everything, and sometimes I don't think I'm an expert in anything, but there are many people out there with very many different backgrounds and fields of expertise, and we definitely would like to bring some of them on to talk about their fields of expertise at a level of detail that we personally might not be able to. So yeah, we have some ideas for guests we might be able to contact and arrange interviews with. So we're not going to commit to a release schedule for those yet, but that they are something we plan to do in the future, and so we can look forward to those.
And I guess I should add, I'm sure you all probably have one big question, or at least one of many questions. Will there be more lecture series? We are considering it.
Yeah.
And I think that's all we will say on that.
Yeah, right. So I'll say that the lecture series were a lot of work, as you might have already gathered. So yeah, I think we're definitely gonna have to think about how we're gonna do any future ones. But we are considering it. And I will say that we're definitely not likely to release any future lecture series immediately in the immediately foreseeable future. We'll instead be focusing on the other types of videos that we list here. Um, but yeah, perhaps the lecture series will return. Yes.
What he said.
Alrighty. So I think that might be pretty much all the content that we had planned for this anniversary episode. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it wasn't too self-indulgent, but it was a nice look back at what we've done. I thought, and so you know, if you like what we do and you want to continue supporting our future plans, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Perhaps we'll put up some sneak previews of the website as we get more of it done, for example. That might be a fun thing to share with our patrons. And yes, your contributions will be greatly appreciated and will help us devote more time and effort into these projects that we hope will be useful resources. We currently have one patron, I believe, who is scheduled for a shout out on each episode, and that is Joan's sister Julie. So thanks again.
Yes, thanks.
And as always, we thank our friend Henry for the theme music and my friend Alicia for the color scheme of my little Alvarezor avatar. That's it's a great color scheme. I love it. And finally, I would like to thank all the viewers who have encouraged us so far. Yeah, like we mentioned, even if we didn't have as big of a following as we do now, I feel like we probably would have still tried to see our series through to the end. Um, but I think it has been extremely encouraging for us to know that there are indeed quite a number of people watching our shows and who enjoy the content and appreciate the information. And I really can't thank all of you enough. We really can't thank all of you enough for all of your support that you give, and we really do enjoy all the views, all the subscriptions, and all the comments that you leave. We thank you for your support and hope it'll continue more into the future.
Yes, here's to another year and more for Through Time and Clades.
Hopefully
Y'all are
so.
the best. We appreciate it big time.
Yeah.
It's a light in my life right now. Y'all are the best.
Awesome. So yes, and with that, if you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter for updates. So we tweet whenever we release new episodes. If you haven't subscribed already and you like the show, and feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel on YouTube, where you're probably watching this right now, anyways. If you have questions, as always, so we might not get to your, we might not do an episode focusing on Q&A like we did for this special in the immediate future. But if you have questions about the show, feel free to leave a comment, and we will try to answer it in the comments. You can also email us at timeandclades@gmail.com if you don't want to leave a YouTube comment, and we can answer it through email there. Yeah, I suppose this isn't a typical episode where we read a lot of papers to make this episode, so we probably won't have exactly a typical reference to this, but we will have links to relevant sources that we listed or mentioned in the episode earlier, like "Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong" or the various sources that we use regarding early interpretations of fossils. So see the description for those. And yeah, with that, I think we've come to an end. And like Joan said, here's to many more, hopefully. Stay safe, everybody, and take care.
Yes, take care, everyone.